She came west with fear in her eyes, but the quiet cowboy gave her a home. The girl stepped off the train with one hand wrapped around a cracked leather suitcase and the other pressed against the pocket where she had hidden the last letter from home. She did not know yet that the man waiting for her beyond the smoke would change her life. She only knew that she was 18, alone, and so frightened that even the sound of her own breathing seemed too loud. The train station in Red Bluff, Montana territory was no grand place. It was only a wooden platform, a small ticket office, 2 hitching rails, and a wind that carried dust across everything. Still, to Nora Bellamy, it felt wider than the whole world. The sky had no mercy out there. It stretched blue and pale above the town, making every secret feel exposed. She stood still while the other passengers moved around her. A woman in a brown traveling coat hurried toward her husband. 2 boys ran laughing after a dog near the freight wagon. A gray-haired man kissed his daughter's forehead before lifting her trunk. Everybody seemed to have someone. Nora had no one. Not anymore. The letter in her pocket had been folded so many times the paper was soft at the edges. She did not need to read it again. Her uncle's words had already burned into her mind. "There is no place for you here now." He had written it as if he were settling an account, not cutting loose the last child of his dead sister. No kindness, no blessing, no apology. Just a line of ink that had pushed her across half the country toward a man she had never met. Jonas Vale. That was the name written on the other letter, the one she kept wrapped in a handkerchief with $3, a small tin photograph of her mother, and a brass button from her father's old coat. Jonas Vale, of Cedar Hollow Ranch, near Mercy Ridge, Montana territory. A widowed rancher, 32 years old, seeking a wife of steady heart and honest hands. That was what his notice had said. He had written back after Nora answered it, and his reply had been plain. "Miss Bellamy, I cannot offer you comfort in the way city folks speak of comfort. I can offer food, a roof, work that has meaning, and a home where no one will raise a hand or a cruel word against you. If you come by your own choice." Nora had read that line until the candle burned low. By your own choice. No one had spoken to her that way in years. The train gave a final hiss behind her, then pulled away, leaving a cloud of coal smoke and silence. Nora's fingers tightened on the suitcase handle. Her gloves were old and thin, and through one torn seam her knuckle showed white. What if he had changed his mind? What if he had seen her first letter and pitied her, then regretted sending the fare? What if he had never meant to come at all? She searched the platform once, then again. A man in a black hat talked with the station master. 2 cowhands loaded sacks of grain. A woman climbed into a wagon with a sleeping child in her lap. No one looked like a promise. Nora swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry from the long journey. 4 days on trains had left her bones aching and her nerves rubbed raw. She had eaten little, slept less, and kept one hand near her pocket every night, in fear that someone might steal the few things she owned. Each mile west had taken her farther from the house, where she was unwanted, but it had not carried her far enough from the fear. Then a voice spoke behind her. Miss Bellamy. Nora turned so quickly the suitcase bumped against her skirt. The man standing a few steps away was not what she had imagined. She had pictured someone stern and old, maybe hard-eyed from loneliness. Jonas Vale was tall, but not in a proud way. His coat was worn brown at the elbows, his boots were dusty, and his hat shadowed a face carved by sun and weather. There were faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind made by squinting into far distance and holding back things better left unsaid. He had a quiet face. That was the first thing Nora noticed. Not gentle exactly, not soft. Quiet. Like a closed church in snowfall. "Yes," she said, though her voice barely came out. "I'm Nora Bellamy." He took off his hat. It was a small gesture, but he did it with such care that her fear shifted, only slightly. "Jonas Vale," he said, "I'm sorry if I made you wait." "You didn't," she said at once. His eyes moved over her face. not in the way men sometimes looked when they thought a girl had no power to object. He looked as if he were checking whether she was tired, cold, hungry, or about to break apart in front of him. Was the trip hard, he asked? Nora almost gave the answer she had been trained to give. It was fine. I'm all right. No trouble at all. But something in his steady gaze made the lie feel too heavy. It was long, she said, and I was afraid most of the way Jonas did not look surprised. He did not tell her she had no reason to be afraid. He only nodded once, slow and grave, as if fear were a real thing and deserved the dignity of being believed. I expect you were, he said. Coming so far alone takes more courage than most folks will ever understand. The word struck her so sharply she had to look down. Courage. She had not thought of herself as brave. She had thought of herself as cornered, a girl with no money, no parents, and no door left open behind her. But this stranger had named her Fear and found something honorable inside it. The platform blurred for a moment. Nora blinked hard and tightened her grip on the suitcase. Jonas seemed to notice, but he did not speak of it. He simply held out his hand toward the suitcase. May I carry that? She hesitated. All her life, help had come with a price. A meal meant obedience. A roof meant silence. A kind word meant someone would later remind you of it when they wanted something in return. Jonas waited. He did not reach again. He did not take. That waiting told her more than any speech could have. At last, she let go. It's not heavy, she said. Still, he answered, picking it up, you carried it far enough. Outside the station, a buckboard waited with a bay horse tied to the rail. The horse flicked one ear when they approached, then stamped lazily at the dust. Jonas set Nora's suitcase in the wagon bed and offered his hand to help her climb up. Again, he waited. Again, he let her choose. She accepted. His palm was rough and warm, and he released her the moment she was steady. The town of Red Bluff passed slowly as they drove out. A general store with flour sacks piled by the door. A blacksmith's shed ringing with metal. A saloon with two men leaning out front watching the wagon go by. Nora felt their eyes and pulled her shawl closer. Jonas noticed Mercy Ridge is quieter than town. He said, Cedar Hollow is quieter still. Is that good? Nora asked. It was lonely before. He said, eyes on the road might be good now. She turned toward him, but his face gave away nothing more. They rode in silence for a while. The road climbed into open country where the grass rolled silver green under the wind. Far ahead, low mountains rose like sleeping giants, their shoulders dark with pine. Nora had never seen land so wide. Back east, walls had always been close. Rooms had been narrow. Voices carried through doors. Here, even the silence seemed to have room to breathe. After nearly an hour, Jonas spoke again. I want something clear between us before we reach the ranch. Nora's stomach tightened. Yes, sir. His mouth shifted at that, not quite a frown. Jonas is fine, if you're comfortable with it. And what I mean is this. You answered a marriage notice. I know that. But nothing has to be settled today. Or tomorrow. Reverend Pike comes through Mercy Ridge in 6 weeks. If you still wish it then, we can speak vows. If you do not, we will make another arrangement. Work. Wages. Passage somewhere else if that is what you choose. Nora stared at him. The wagon wheels creaked over stone. A hawk circled above a dry wash. The bay horse blew softly through its nose. You would send me away, she asked, if you asked me to. And if I did not know where to go, then you would have time to decide. The simplicity of it frightened her more than any threat might have. She knew what to do with cruelty. She knew how to fold herself small under anger. But patience unsettled her. Choice unsettled her. A door left unlocked felt impossible to trust. Why, she whispered. Jonas looked at the road ahead for a long moment before answering. Because a woman should not have to trade one kind of fear for another and call it a home. Nora felt those words settle deep, deeper than she wanted them to. She turned her face toward the open land so he would not see what they had done to her. By late afternoon, Cedar Hollow Ranch appeared between two ridges, tucked near a line of cottonwoods that marked a creek. The house was built of timber, plain but solid, with a stone chimney and a porch that sagged slightly on one end. A barn stood to the left, red paint faded by years of sun. There were chickens scratching near the fence, a milk cow near the shed, and a blue shirt hanging from the clothesline, snapping in the wind like a small flag. It was not grand. It was not fine. But smoke rose from the chimney, and the windows caught the gold of the lowering sun. Nora felt an ache open in her chest. A boy of about 16 came out of the barn carrying a feed bucket. He stopped when he saw the wagon, and his freckled face lit with open curiosity. "That's Toby Reed. Jonas said he helps with chores and talks more than any 3 men should." "I heard that," the boy called. "You were meant to," Jonas said. Toby hurried over, wiping one hand on his trousers. "Ma'am," he said, trying to sound grown and failing. "You came on the train? Was it fast? Did you see any robbers?" "Do ladies back east really wear gloves to breakfast?" "Toby," Jonas said. The boy snapped his mouth shut. For the first time in days, Nora almost smiled. "I did come on the train," she said. "It was fast sometimes. I saw no robbers. And I never wore gloves to breakfast." Toby looked both disappointed and delighted. "Well, I'm glad you're here anyway. Such an easy welcome. Such a careless kindness." Nora had to grip the edge of the wagon seat before climbing down. Jonas showed her the house himself. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee, wood smoke, and bread that had been baked badly, but with good intentions. The sitting room had one worn chair, a small table, a shelf of books, and a framed photograph turned face down on the mantel. Nora saw it, but asked nothing. Upstairs, Jonas stopped at the door at the end of the hall. "This room is yours," he said. He opened it and stepped back, letting her enter first. There was a narrow bed with a clean quilt, a washstand, a braided rug, and a window facing the cottonwoods. On the small desk sat a lamp with fresh oil and a chipped blue cup holding 3 wildflowers already beginning to droop. Nora stared at them. "Toby picked those. Jonas said the room looked too empty." Her throat tightened. Then Jonas added, almost awkwardly, "There's a latch on the inside of the door. It holds strong." Nora turned to him. He did not smile. He did not make a speech. He simply stood there, hat in hand, giving her the one thing she had not known how badly she needed. A room where she could close the door. A room where no one could come in unless she allowed it. Her fingers trembled as she set her suitcase beside the bed. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." He paused. "Supper will be ready when you are. No hurry." He left her there. Nora waited until his boots faded down the stairs. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, pulled the letter from her pocket, and looked at the cruel line one last time. "There is no place for you here now." Slowly, she folded it smaller and tucked it into the desk drawer. Not burned, not forgotten, just put away. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. Somewhere below, Toby laughed at something Jonas said. The sound was small and warm inside the wooden walls. For the first time since leaving Pennsylvania, Nora let herself breathe. But as dusk settled over Cedar Hollow, a rider stopped on the ridge above the ranch. He sat on a black horse, watching the house until the kitchen lamp came on. Then he turned and rode back toward Mercy Ridge, carrying news that the girl from the east had arrived. And with that news, trouble began its slow ride toward Cedar Hollow. Morning came to Cedar Hollow, with a pale gold light sliding over the cottonwoods, and a rooster that sounded personally offended by the dawn. Nora woke before the house stirred. For a moment she did not know where she was. Her hand went straight to the edge of the bed, searching for the wall that had always been too close in her uncle's narrow house. But there was no wall beside her, no coats hanging over her face, no cold floor under a thin blanket. There was a window brightening with sunrise. There was a quilt pulled up to her chin, There was a door with a latch on the inside. She stared at that latch for a long time. Then she remembered. Montana. Cedar Hollow. Jonas Vale. The room was still hers. No one had opened the door in the night. No one had shouted for her before dawn. No one had told her she was lazy for sleeping while others worked. The quiet felt almost too gentle to trust. She dressed quickly in her plain blue work dress and braided her hair with fingers that still trembled from old habits. On the desk, the wildflowers Toby had picked leaned tiredly in the chipped cup. Nora touched one soft yellow petal and felt something in her chest pinch. It had been a long while since anyone had thought a room looked empty because she was not yet in it. Downstairs, she found the kitchen cold but orderly. A sack of flour stood against the wall. A coffee pot sat on the stove. A bowl of eggs rested near the window, and on the table was a loaf of bread so heavy and lopsided it looked like it had survived a fall from a barn roof. Nora looked at it. Then, despite herself, she smiled. It was not a large smile. It barely reached her mouth. But it was real, and it startled her. She tied on the faded apron hanging from a peg, rolled up her sleeves, and began. Work had always been the one language that made sense to her. Grief could be folded into dough. Fear could be scrubbed from a pan. Worry could be chopped with onions and carrots until it became something useful. So she worked without asking permission, because standing idle in a new place would have frightened her worse than anything. By the time Jonas came in from the barn, the stove was hot, the coffee was fresh, the heavy loaf had been cut into cubes for a skillet pudding, and a new pan of biscuits was browning in the oven. He stopped in the doorway. Nora turned too fast, wiping her hands on the apron. "I hope you don't mind. I should have asked before using things." Jonas looked past her at the clean counter, the biscuits, the coffee, the table set for three. "Mind?" he asked. I did not want to presume. He stepped inside slowly, as if he feared one wrong word might send her running back upstairs. "Nora, I have been eating my own cooking for 6 years. You could burn every pan in this kitchen and still improve the situation." She stared at him. His face remained serious, but his eyes had changed. Just a little. Behind him, Toby burst through the back door with straw on his sleeve and mud on his boots. He sniffed the air and stopped dead. "Lord help us," he said. "Real biscuits." "Toby," Jonas warned. "No, sir, I mean it kindly." Nora lowered her eyes, but warmth rose into her cheeks. "They may not be as good as they smell." Quote. Toby sat so fast the chair scraped the floor. "I am willing to take that risk." Jonas removed his hat and hung it on the peg by the door. Before sitting, he glanced at Nora, "You joining us?" It was such a simple question, but it caught her unprepared. At her uncle's house, she had served first and eaten last. Sometimes at the table, if company was gone. Sometimes standing near the stove. Sometimes not at all if her uncle's mood had turned sour. "I can eat after," she said. Jonas pulled out a chair. "No," he said quietly. "You eat with us here." Toby, who had already reached for a biscuit, froze with his hand in the air, as if even he understood that something important had just been laid on the table. Nora looked at the chair. Jonas did not push it toward her. He only stood behind it, waiting. Choice again. Always choice. At last she sat down. The first bite of biscuit tasted of butter, salt, and disbelief. The meal was plain, but to Nora it felt like a feast. Toby talked between bites, telling her about the cow that hated men in red shirts, the rooster that once chased a traveling salesman into the wash shed, and the time Jonas tried to mend his own shirt sleeve and sewed it halfway shut. Jonas said little, but he listened. Once, when Toby exaggerated so badly even the rooster would have objected, Jonas lifted one brow. "That is not how it happened. It is how I remember it. That does not improve its honesty." Nora almost laughed again, but held it back. Laughter still felt dangerous, a thing that might be noticed and used against her. When breakfast ended, she stood quickly and began gathering plates. Jonas rose too. "You cooked." "I'll wash." The plate in her hand nearly slipped. "No, that's not necessary." "I know. I can do it. I know that too." She looked at him. confused and wary. Then why he took the coffee cups from the table, because work is not punishment here. It is just work. Everybody carries some of it. Nora had no answer for that. So she let him wash. She dried the dishes beside him, and for a few minutes the kitchen held only the small sounds of water, crockery, and Toby outside, calling to a mule that clearly had no respect for him. Jonas handed Nora a plate, and she wiped it dry with a clean cloth. Their shoulders did not touch, but she was aware of him, of the careful space he kept between them. Not distance. Respect. Later, while Jonas and Toby checked the lower pasture, Nora explored the house with the purpose of a woman measuring the shape of a new life. She opened cupboards, counted jars, found 2 sacks of beans, 1 of cornmeal, a jar of molasses, coffee, salt pork, dried apples, and enough flour to last several weeks if used carefully. The pantry shelves were not empty, but they were poorly arranged. Nails sat beside tea, soap beside sugar. A mouse had chewed the corner of 1 grain sack. She found a notebook in the sitting room under a stack of old newspapers and began making a list. By noon, the pantry had been cleaned, sorted, and swept. The cracked grain sack had been stitched and hung from a hook. The soap was moved away from food. The dried apples were sealed tighter. She found 3 potatoes going soft in the bottom of a bin and set them aside for supper before they were lost completely. When Jonas returned, he stood at the pantry door and said nothing. Nora felt the old fear jump inside her. "I should have asked," she said. "I know. I only thought it would keep better this way, but I can put everything back if you prefer." Jonas looked at the shelves, then at the list on the table. "Why would I prefer worse?" She blinked. He picked up the notebook and read the first few lines. "You counted everything." "Yes." "And marked what will run short before winter." "Yes." "And what needs to be bought in town." "Yes." He was quiet a moment. Nora's hands tightened around the broom handle. Then he said, "That is more sense than this pantry has seen in years." She let out a breath so small she barely heard it herself. "My mother used to say a household speaks through its shelves," Nora said, then regretted it at once. It sounded too soft, too personal. Jonas did not mock it. "What do these shelves say?" he asked. She looked toward the pantry. "That a man has been getting by instead of living well." The words landed before she could call them back. Jonas lowered his eyes to the notebook. For a moment she thought she had wounded him, but when he spoke, his voice held no anger. "That sounds true." Nora wished she knew what to do with a man who accepted truth without striking back at it. That afternoon, he showed her the yard, the smokehouse, the wash line, the well, the small kitchen garden gone wild with weeds and late beans, the creek beyond the cottonwoods, narrow but lively, running over stones with a sound like soft talking. Nora stood at its bank while the wind lifted the loose hairs around her face. The water was clear enough that she could see pebbles at the bottom. "My mother loved moving water," she said before she could stop herself. Jonas stood a few feet away. "Did she?" Nora nodded. She said water knew how to leave and still belong somewhere. The creek moved around a fallen branch, silver in the light. "How old were you when she passed?" Jonas asked. 14. He removed his hat, though there was no funeral there, no grave, only memory. "I'm sorry." Most people said those words quickly, as if grief were a cold room they wished to leave. Jonas said them and stayed quiet inside them. Nora watched the creek. "After she died, my uncle took me in. I suppose he thought that was kindness enough." "Was it?" She kept her face turned away. "No." The wind moved through the cottonwoods. A horse shifted somewhere behind them, leather tack creaking softly. Jonas did not ask for details. That mercy nearly undid her. Instead, he said, "My wife used to sit here." Nora turned her head. His eyes were on the water. His face had closed somewhat, not against her, but against pain too old to speak easily. "Her name was Lydia," he said. "She died of fever the second winter after we built the house." "I'm sorry," Nora said. He nodded once. "Folks thought I placed the marriage notice because I was tired of work. That was part of it, I suppose. A ranch needs more than one pair of hands, But mostly, I think I was tired of eating supper across from an empty chair. Nora looked back at the creek. There it was, the truth between them. Not romantic. Not dressed up, just two lonely people standing near water, both carrying losses they had not chosen. "I know something about empty chairs," she said. Jonas looked at her then, and something quiet passed between them. Not love. Not yet. Not trust entirely, but recognition maybe. The way one traveler sees another on a hard road and understands the dust on their boots. That evening, supper was potato soup with salt pork, biscuits warmed from morning, and dried apples simmered with molasses. Toby declared it the finest meal served in Montana Territory, then ruined the dignity of the statement by burning his tongue. After supper, Nora noticed the face-down photograph on the mantel again. Jonas followed her gaze. "My Lydia," he said. Nora stepped back at once. "I didn't mean to pry." "You didn't," quote. He crossed the room, lifted the frame, and set it upright. The woman in the photograph had kind eyes and a solemn mouth. She wore a dark dress buttoned to the throat, one hand resting on the back of a chair. Nora studied her with a strange ache. She was beautiful, she said. She was stubborn. Jonas answered the beautiful part too. Nora expected the mention of a dead wife to make the room colder. Instead, it made Jonas seem more human, more wounded, more careful because he knew how love could leave a house silent. "She should not have to be hidden," Nora said softly. Jonas looked at the photograph for a long while. "No," he said. "I reckon she should not." The lamp flame trembled in the draft. Outside, the night deepened over Cedar Hollow. The house settled with small wooden sighs. In the distance, a coyote called once and fell silent. Nora went upstairs later with tired hands and a fuller stomach than she had known in weeks. At her bedroom door, she paused and looked down the hall. Jonas stood below in the kitchen, banking the stove, his shadow long against the wall. He did not look like a stranger now. That frightened her. She closed her door and slid the latch into place. Then she opened the desk drawer and took out her uncle's letter. She held it in her lap, reading the cruel line without tears. "There is no place for you here now." Below it, on the blank back of the paper, Nora took up the pencil from the desk and wrote one sentence in small, careful letters. "Maybe there is." She folded the letter again and returned it to the drawer. Far away, on the ridge beyond the cottonwoods, a lantern moved once in the dark. Someone had come close enough to see the house, close enough to count its lit windows, close enough to know the new girl had not run. By morning, Mercy Ridge would be talking. And before Nora understood the worth of the home she had found, someone in town would begin trying to take it from her. By the time Nora stepped into Mercy Ridge again, the town already knew her name. She could feel it before anyone spoke. It was in the way two men outside the blacksmith shop stopped laughing when Jonas guided the wagon past. It was in the way a woman sweeping the porch of the boarding house looked up, then lowered her eyes too quickly. It was in the sudden hush that fell inside the general store when Nora entered, with her supply list folded in one hand. Mercy Ridge was not large enough to hide curiosity. A single street ran between the bank, the mercantile, the livery, the church, and a saloon with faded green doors. Every building seemed to lean a little from wind and years. Every window seemed to hold a face. Nora kept her back straight. Jonas walked beside her, carrying the empty flour sack they meant to refill. He did not stand too close, but his presence beside her was steady as a fence post. At the counter, Mrs. Alma Pike, the storekeeper's wife, greeted Jonas first morning, "Mr. Vale." "Morning." Then her eyes shifted to Nora, not unkindly, but carefully. "And you must be Miss Bellamy." "I am," Nora said. "Long way from Pennsylvania." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Pike tapped her pencil against the counter. "Folks say you came to marry." Nora felt heat rise along her throat, but she did not look away. "Folks say many things before breakfast." For half a breath, the store went still. Then Jonas made a low sound in his chest that might have been a cough, or might have been the closest thing to laughter he allowed in public. Mrs. Pike's mouth twitched. "Well," she said, "that much is true enough." Nora placed her list on the counter. "We need flour, lamp oil, salt, coffee, thread, and a new latch for the chicken coop, if you have one. Practical list. Practical house." Mrs. Pike looked at her more closely then, as if the girl standing before her did not fit the shape town gossip had drawn. Nora knew that look. She had seen it from aunts, church ladies, shopkeepers, and every person who ever expected her to be smaller than she was. While Mrs. Pike gathered the goods, Nora walked toward the back shelves. A tin of peaches caught her eye. Her mother used to save peaches for Sundays, slicing them into a cracked white bowl with a sprinkle of sugar when times were good. Nora touched the tin but did not take it. Such things cost extra. Such things were not needed. A voice spoke behind her. "So you're the Eastern girl." Nora turned. A young man stood near the sacks of oats, maybe 25, broad-shouldered, fair-haired, wearing a fine wool coat too clean for morning work. His smile was pleasant in the way a knife could be polished. "I suppose I am." "Nora," said Wade Mercer. He tipped his hat. "My father owns the North Bank, and near half the notes in this valley." Nora understood at once that the last part was not information. It was a warning wrapped in manners. "How fortunate for him," she said. Wade's smile thinned. "You talk sharp for a girl newly arrived." "I talk plain." "Plain talking can cause trouble here." Jonas appeared at the end of the aisle before Nora could answer. He carried himself quietly, but the air changed around him. "Wade." He said Vale. Wade's eyes moved between them. "I was just welcoming Miss Bellamy." "No," Jonas said, "you weren't." The words were calm, but they landed hard. Wade gave a small laugh. "Careful. A man should not start acting married before the vows are spoken." Nora saw Jonas's jaw tighten. She stepped forward before anger could choose his words for him. "And a gentleman should not speak of vows that do not concern him," she said. "Yet here we are, both learning." This time Mrs. Pike did laugh, a quick sound she tried to cover with a cough from the counter. Wade's face colored, but only slightly. "You'll learn this country soon enough, Miss Bellamy." "I intend to." He tipped his hat again, colder now, and left the aisle. Jonas watched him go. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For him." Nora looked toward the front door where Wade Mercer had disappeared into the street. "He speaks as if he owns more than money. He thinks he does. Does he?" Jonas did not answer quickly. "His father, Silas Mercer, holds loans on ranches from here to the Willow Bend. He is careful, quiet, and patient. Wade is less careful." Nora folded her hands at her waist so he would not see them tremble. "Is your ranch one of them?" Jonas's eyes met hers. For a moment, all the noise of the store seemed to draw back. "My South Pasture note," he said, "it belonged to another lender years ago. Mercer bought it last spring." Nora felt the floor shift under her, though she had not moved. "Is it safe?" "It has been." "That is not an answer." "No," Jonas said. "It isn't." Mrs. Pike called from the counter, and the subject ended because public places had ears. But Nora carried the words home in silence. "Mercer bought it last spring." The ride back to Cedar Hollow felt different. The same road climbed through the same pale grass. The same cottonwoods marked the creek line ahead. But now Nora saw the land with new understanding. The fences were not just fences. The pasture was not just pasture. The creek was not just water singing over stones. It could all be lost. At supper, Toby was halfway through a story about a mule and a broken gate when he noticed the quiet around the table. "What happened in town?" he asked. "Nothing worth chewing with your mouth open over," Jonas said. Toby closed his mouth. Nora glanced at Jonas. "Does Toby know about the note?" Jonas set his spoon down. Toby looked between them. "What note?" "The South Pasture," Nora said gently. Jonas leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she arrived, He looked tired in a way that work alone could not explain. The land along the lower creek was bought with borrowed money after Lydia passed. He said I needed grazing room. The terms were fair then. Last spring, Silas Mercer bought the note from the widow who held it. Nothing changed on paper, but something changed in truth, Nora said. Jonas looked at her, surprised by how quickly she saw it. Maybe Toby's face had lost its boyish ease. Can he take the ranch? No, Jonas said. Nora noticed he answered too fast. Not all of it, he added, but the south pasture holds the best winter grass. Losing it would hurt. How much is owed? Nora asked. Jonas hesitated. She waited. At last he rose, crossed to the shelf near the stove, and took down a battered ledger. He placed it in front of her with the solemnity of a man laying down more than paper. Nora opened it. The numbers were neat, written in Jonas's square hand. Feed costs, cattle sales, seed, repairs, loan payment dates, interest. She read slowly at first, then faster. Toby shifted in his chair. The stove cracked softly. Outside, a horse stamped near the barn. Nora turned back 3 pages and traced a line with her finger. This payment here, she said. Why did it rise in June? Mercer said insurance fees were added after transfer. Was that in the original agreement? I don't know. She looked up. Where is the original agreement? In the desk drawer. Locked. May I see it? Jonas studied her across the table. The lamplight made the lines in his face deeper, but his eyes were clear. You understand. Accounts. I understand when numbers start pretending, Toby whispered. Numbers can pretend. Nora did not smile. Men make them do it. Jonas brought the locked box from the sitting room. The key hung from a nail behind the mantel clock. When he opened it, Nora saw papers tied in bundles, a folded deed, a small cloth pouch, and a photograph of Lydia that looked older than the one on the mantel. He removed the loan document and handed it to her. Nora was careful with it. She spread it flat beside the ledger, weighted the corners with a cup and salt jar, and began comparing the figures. Minutes passed. Then half an hour. Then an hour. Jonas did not interrupt. Toby tried twice to ask questions, but Jonas silenced him with a look. At last, Nora sat back. The insurance fee is not in the original terms, she said. Jonas's face hardened. You're certain? It mentions transfer rights. It mentions interest. It mentions late penalties. No insurance fee. No adjustment clause. She tapped the ledger. Mercer added a charge. You never agreed to. Toby's eyes widened. Can he do that? Not honestly, Nora said. Jonas stood very still, the lamp flame bent in a draft. From outside came the lonely sound of wind moving along the eaves. Nora looked down at the papers and felt the past rising behind her. Her uncle's ledgers, his locked desk, his voice saying she had no head for business while she silently corrected his mistakes in her mind. All those nights she thought knowledge was useless because no one would ever ask what she knew. Now someone had, if this keeps going, she said, the extra fee will make you look behind, even if every true payment is made. Jonas's hands closed slowly at his sides, and then Mercer can call the note. Yes, Toby swallowed when Nora looked again at the figures. Her stomach tightened. If he means to do it, she said. Soon, no one spoke. Then Jonas reached for the papers, but not to take them away. He turned the ledger toward her and pulled out the chair beside her. Show me, he said. Nora looked at him. That simple request opened something in her heart she was not ready to name. So she showed him. Line by line, page by page, while the night deepened outside Cedar Hollow and the kitchen lamp burned low. If this moment touched your heart, stay with Nora's journey, because sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the only one who can see the truth before it is too late. Near midnight, after Toby had gone to the bunk room yawning and Jonas had banked the stove, Nora returned the papers to the locked box. But before Jonas closed it, she noticed something tucked beneath Lydia's old photograph. A narrow envelope, yellowed. Sealed once, then opened and folded again. Across the front, in faded ink, was written one name: Silas Mercer. Nora looked at Jonas. His face had gone pale beneath the lamplight. "That letter," he said quietly, "was written 3 days before Lydia died." And Nora understood, with a chill moving through her, that the trouble coming for Cedar Hollow had started long before she ever stepped off the train. The kitchen felt colder after Jonas said Lydia's name. Nora stood beside the table with the open box between them, the old envelope lying on top of the papers like something that had waited years to be found. The lamp flame shivered. Outside, wind brushed along the walls and made the cottonwood scrape softly against one another. Jonas did not touch the letter. For a long moment, neither of them did. "What does it say?" Nora asked. Jonas's eyes stayed fixed on the faded ink. "I only read it once. When the night after she was buried." Nora's breath caught, but she kept quiet. Jonas sat down slowly, as if his legs no longer trusted him. The chair gave a low creak under his weight. He rubbed one hand over his face and looked older than he had that morning in town. "Lydia kept it hidden," he said. "I found it in her sewing basket. I thought at first it was a bill or some church note she forgot to send. Then I saw Mercer's name." Nora sat across from him. She did not reach for his hand. She wanted to, but she had learned that sorrow was a room a person had to be invited into. "What was between them?" she asked gently. "Nothing like that." Jonas looked up at once, the answer firm. Lydia was not secretive in that way. She was honest, clear through. Too honest sometimes. His mouth tightened with a memory that nearly became a smile, and then failed. The letter was about land. Nora looked down at the envelope again. Of course it was. Out here, land seemed to lie under every wound. Jonas lifted the letter at last. His fingers were careful, but Nora could see how hard it was for him. The paper made a dry whisper as he unfolded it. He read silently first, as if making sure the words had not changed. Then he placed it in front of her. Nora leaned closer. The handwriting was neat, a woman's hand, slanting a little to the right. "Mr. Mercer, I will not sign what you sent. My husband does not know of your offer, and I will not let him be pressed while grief still sits in this house. The south pasture belonged to my father before it belonged to me. I brought it into this marriage freely. I will not have it taken by clever wording or false kindness. If you come again while Jonas is away, I will tell him everything." Nora read the last line twice. Then she looked at the date, 3 days before Lydia's fever turned deadly. Her skin prickled. Mercer tried to buy the south pasture from her. Nora said. "Jonas nodded without telling you." "Yes." And she refused him. His eyes lowered. "Yes." Nora looked again at the letter. "Did she tell you?" "No." Why his jaw worked once. "Because I was already carrying too much, I suppose. My mother had died that spring. Cattle prices had dropped. The roof needed replacing. Lydia was with child." Then Nora looked up sharply. Jonas's face closed, but not fast enough to hide the pain. "She lost the baby before winter," he said. "Then fever took her in January." "I'm sorry," Nora whispered. He nodded once, but his gaze had gone far from the room. Mercer came to the funeral, stood right by the church door in his fine black coat. "Told me if I ever needed help keeping the place together, I should come see him." Nora felt anger rise in her, steady and hot. "And later you borrowed against the south pasture. I had no choice." Jonas said feed was short. I was alone. Toby had not come yet. The bank in Helena would not lend this far out, and the widow who held the note then offered fair terms. I thought I had avoided Mercer. But he bought the note. Last spring, Nora sat back slowly. The pieces did not yet form a whole picture, but they were beginning to lean toward one another. Mercer had wanted Lydia's land before she died. Years later, his family bought the debt tied to that same land. Now strange fees appeared in the ledger, quiet as snakes in dry grass. "Jonas," she said, "did anyone else know Lydia refused him? I don't know. Was there any witness when he came? Maybe Mrs. Pike." She came by sometimes when Lydia was poorly, but I cannot say what she saw or heard. Nora folded the letter with care. Then we should ask her. Jonas's eyes sharpened. No. Why not? Because Mercer owns half the town's debts. If we start asking questions, word reaches him before sundown. It will reach him anyway. Then we wait. Nora looked at him across the lamplight. Waiting is what men like Mercer count on. Jonas stood abruptly and crossed to the stove. He opened the door, stirred the coals, then closed it again with more force than needed. I know what men like Mercer are. Nora rose too, but kept her voice even. Do you? He turned then. For the first time since she had met him, Jonas looked angry. Not cruel, not unsafe, but angry in the deep, buried way of a man who had lived too long with helplessness and called it patience because the other name hurt too much. I know he came around when my wife was alive. He said, I know he smiled at her across church suppers and offered help that was not help. I know I found that letter too late to ask her why she never told me. I know he bought the note last spring, and now there is a fee I never agreed to. So yes, Nora, I know enough. The room went still. Toby, who had come quietly to the kitchen doorway in his nightshirt, froze with one hand on the frame. Jonas saw him and closed his eyes briefly. I'm sorry, he said. Quieter now. Toby swallowed. I only came for water. No, Jonas said. You came because voices carried. Fetch your water. The boy moved carefully to the bucket, filled a cup, and looked at Nora with wide, worried eyes before slipping away again. Nora heard his steps fade. Then she looked back at Jonas. I was not accusing you. She said I was asking because I need to understand the shape of the thing before it cuts us. The anger drained from his face, leaving only weariness. I know. He sat again, slower this time. Forgive me. There's nothing to forgive. There is. Nora did not argue. Sometimes a person needed to own the harm of a sharp word before they could set it down. She sat with him until the silence softened. At last, Jonas pushed the letter toward her. What would you do? The question was quiet, but it changed the room. Nora looked at the papers, the ledger, the old letter, the locked box with its worn hinges. I would make copies, she said. Of the note, of the payments, of Lydia's letter. Then I would check the county records and see when Mercer first tried to buy land near Cedar Hollow. If he wanted this pasture years ago, there may be other letters, other offers, other families. He pressed Jonas, listened without moving. I would also talk to Mrs. Pike, but carefully. Not in the store, not where ears can gather. And I would not let Wade Mercer know he unsettled me today. Men like him enjoy seeing fear. It makes them careless. Jonas studied her. You speak like you have fought this fight. Before Nora looked at the dark window. Her own reflection stared back, pale and thin, but not as helpless as it had seemed yesterday. My uncle kept ledgers for a mill outside Harrisburg. She said he cheated widows on grain weight when he could. He hid charges inside long columns because he believed women and working men would not know how to read them. Her hands curled in her lap. I knew. I always knew. I just never had anyone who wanted the truth from me. Jonas did not answer quickly. When he did, his voice was low. I want it. Nora looked at him the truth. He said, even if it costs me comfort, even if it comes late, I want it. That was the moment something inside Nora shifted. Small, but certain, like a latch sliding open. She nodded. Then tomorrow, she said, we begin. The next morning, Mercy Ridge woke under a gray sky and the smell of coming rain. Jonas rode out early to check a weak section of fence near the lower creek, and Nora stayed behind with the ledgers spread across the kitchen table. Toby sat across from her, pretending to mend a bridle strap, while actually watching every move she made. You think Mr. Mercer hurt Miss Lydia? He asked suddenly. Nora's pencil stopped. She looked at him. Careful now. I think he wanted something from her. That ain't what I asked. No, Nora said softly. It isn't Toby's young face had gone hard in a way. Boys, faces should not have to. "I was here when she died," he said. Nora stilled. "I thought you came after." "After the baby," Toby said, "before the fever. My PA had left me in town and did not come back." Mrs. Pike asked Miss Lydia if she could use a boy for chores. She said yes. He rubbed the bridle leather between his fingers. "She was kind to me." Nora waited. The day before she took to bed, a man came while Mr. Jonas was gone. "I was in the loft putting hay down. I heard voices by the back door." Miss Lydia sounded mad. Not scared. Mad. "Was it Mercer Toby looked at the table?" "I don't know. I only saw his horse when he left. Black horse. Silver bridle piece shaped like a star." Nora's mouth went dry. Wade Mercer had ridden a black horse in town. A black horse with a silver star on the bridle. She reached for the old letter and pressed it flat. "Toby," she said, "why did you never tell Jonas?" The boy's eyes shone, though he fought it. "Because 2 days later she was dying. Then she was gone. And after that, Mr. Jonas looked like, if one more truth touched him, he might fall clean through the floor." Nora's heart ached. Before she could answer, hooves sounded outside. Not Jonas's steady bay. More than one horse. Toby stood fast. Nora gathered Lydia's letter and slipped it beneath the ledger just as the knock came at the door. 3 hard strikes. Not neighborly. Not patient. She opened it. Wade Mercer stood on the porch, rain shining on the brim of his black hat. Behind him sat 2 riders, quiet and watchful. His smile was smooth. "Morning, Miss Bellamy," he said. "My father heard you've been looking through Mr. Vale's accounts." Nora kept one hand on the door. "Your father hears a great deal." "He does." Wade's eyes moved past her into the kitchen, toward the table, toward the ledgers. He also knows when a young woman is about to misunderstand matters that do not concern her. Nora felt Toby behind her, tense as a drawn rope. She lifted her chin. "Then tell your father," she said. "I have always found misunderstanding less dangerous than silence." Wade's smile faded. Rain began to fall harder on the porch roof, and behind Nora, hidden beneath Jonas Vale's ledger, Lydia's letter waited like a match beside dry hay. Wade Mercer stood on the porch as if the house belonged to him already. Rain slipped from the brim of his black hat and tapped against the boards by his boots. Behind him, the 2 riders waited on their horses with their collars turned up and their eyes lowered, in the way hired men lowered their eyes when they did not want to be remembered too clearly. Nora kept the door half open and her body in the gap. She could feel Toby behind her, still as a fence rail. The ledger lay on the kitchen table. Lydia's letter was hidden beneath it. The old paper felt louder than thunder, Miss Bellamy. Wade said, "My father prefers not to make trouble with neighbors." "That must be a comfort to the neighbors," Nora said. His jaw tightened just enough for her to see it. "He is willing to overlook Mr. Vale's recent confusion about the South Pasture account. In fact, he sent me to offer a kind adjustment." A kind adjustment. Wade reached inside his coat and produced a folded paper A settlement. "Mr. Vale signs this, and my father will remove the insurance charges you have taken such interest in. In return, Mr. Vale agrees not to contest the note transfer or question any prior dealings between our families." Nora did not reach for the paper. The rain strengthened, hissing in the yard. A chicken darted under the porch steps, offended by the weather and every human responsible for it. "Mr. Vale is not here," Nora said. "I can see that." "Then you can bring your paper back when he is." Wade smiled again, but his eyes had gone cold. "I believe you may have some influence over him." "I believe Mr. Vale has his own mind." "Every man does until a pretty face starts whispering in his kitchen." Toby stepped forward. Nora lifted one hand slightly without looking back, and the boy stopped. The insult landed, but Nora did not let it show. Her uncle had taught her that men who could not win with facts often reached for filth. If she flinched, Wade would know where to strike next. "You rode through rain to bring a paper," she said. "Either it matters more than you pretend, or you enjoy poor weather." One of the riders shifted in his saddle. Wade's smile disappeared. "You are young," he said quietly, "so I will speak plain. There are matters in this valley that began before you came west, with your little suitcase and your sad story. Do not mistake a warm bed and a few kind words from Jonas Vale for standing. You do not have any Nora's hand tightened on the door edge. Inside her, fear rose fast. Old fear, familiar fear. The kind that knew how quickly a man's voice could turn into consequence. But behind that fear came something stronger. Lydia's letter. Jonas's quiet trust. Toby watching her as if her courage might teach him how to hold his own. Nora looked Wade Mercer directly in the eye. I had no standing when I boarded the train either, she said, yet here I am. For a moment the only sound was rain. Then Wade leaned closer, lowering his voice. Tell Vale, my father's patience has limits. Nora did not move. Tell your father, truth does too. Wade stared at her for a long second. Then he tossed the folded settlement paper onto the porch floor, turned, and mounted his horse. The silver star on the bridle flashed dull in the gray light. Nora saw it. Toby saw it too. Wade rode away without looking back, his men following close behind. Only when the hoofbeats faded into rain did Nora close the door. Toby let out the breath he had been holding. That was his horse. Yes, Nora said, the same bridle piece I saw years ago. Yes. Quote, what do we do? Nora picked up the settlement paper from the porch and brought it inside. She did not unfold it yet. First, she moved Lydia's letter from beneath the ledger and placed both papers side by side on the table. Then she looked at Toby. We remember everything exactly. The boy nodded hard, trying to look older than 16, and Toby, yes, ma'am. No riding into town. No telling anyone. Not Mrs. Pike. Not the blacksmith. Not a soul. His face fell a little, but if folks knew what he said, then Wade would know what frightened us. He didn't frighten me. Nora looked at him gently. Toby's mouth pressed shut. All right, he muttered. He did some good. Nora said, fear is useful if it tells the truth and does not lead the wagon. Toby frowned. You say things strange sometimes. My mother did too. That softened him. He sat down at the table while Nora unfolded Wade's paper. The settlement was written in formal language, but its meaning was plain enough. If Jonas signed, Mercer would forgive the disputed charges, but Jonas would also give up the right to question any past communication about the South Pasture. More than that, he would agree that all dealings before the note transfer had been fair, known, and uncontested. Nora read the clause 3 times. Her pulse quickened. This was not kindness. It was a door being closed before anyone realized there was a room behind it. Wade Mercer did not know exactly what Nora had found, but he knew enough to be afraid of old paper. By the time Jonas returned near noon, rain had soaked his coat dark and left mud up the legs of his trousers. He entered through the back door, stopped at the sight of the papers on the table, then looked at Nora's face. What happened? Wade came. All softness left him. Toby began speaking at once, spilling the story with more heat than order, describing Wade's words, the men outside, the paper, the horse, the silver star. Jonas listened without interrupting, but his face changed in small ways. His mouth hardened first, then his eyes. Then something deeper, something old and wounded, seemed to wake in him. When Toby finished, Jonas looked at Nora. He threatened you. He tried to. That is not what I asked. Nora held his gaze. Yes. In the manner of men who wish to keep their gloves clean. Jonas turned toward the door. Nora moved faster than she knew she could. She stepped in front of him before he reached it. No. Nora, move. No. He looked down at her, rain still dripping from his coat, anger burning quiet and dangerous in his face. I will not have him come to my house and speak to you that way. And what will you do? She asked. Ride into town and strike him in front of witnesses. Give Silas Mercer proof that you are unstable. Make every word I say look like the scheming of a woman stirring trouble in a peaceful man's house. Jonas's breathing was heavy. He came here while I was gone. Yes. because he wanted this exact response from you when you came back." Jonas looked past her toward the wet yard, hands flexing once at his sides. Nora lowered her voice. "I know you are angry. You have every right. But we cannot afford anger that spends itself too soon." His eyes came back to her. The room held still. Toby stood by the table, watching as if the whole ranch balanced between them. After a long moment, Jonas stepped back. "What do we do instead?" he asked. Nora let out a breath she had not meant to hold. "We take the paper to someone who understands legal wording." "Mercy Ridge has no lawyer." "No," she said. "But Mrs. Pike's brother is the county clerk in Helena, isn't he?" Jonas blinked. "How do you know that?" "She mentioned it in the store while wrapping thread. People say useful things when they think you are only buying flour." Toby gave a small, admiring whistle. Jonas looked at her with that same expression she had begun to recognize. Surprise, respect, and something warmer that he tried to hide. "Because he was a careful man, I can ride to Helena. Jonas said Number Wade will watch you. He expects you to make a move now." "Then who?" Nora hesitated. Toby straightened me. "No," Jonas said at once. "I know the back trail past the old saw pit. Toby said I can be in Mercy Ridge before dark and give a letter to Mrs. Pike without going near the Mercer Bank. You are not carrying papers that could put you in trouble. I carry feed bills and post all the time. This is different." Toby's face flushed. "I ain't a baby." "No," Jonas said. "You are a boy I am responsible for." Those words struck Toby harder than a slap would have. His anger faltered, leaving something bright and young beneath it. Nora saw it. Jonas did too. The boy looked down. "Nobody was responsible for me before." Quote. Jonas's expression changed. He took a slow breath. "I am now," he said. The kitchen went very quiet. Nora turned away to give them both room with the feeling. She picked up Lydia's letter and gently pressed the fold flat. "Then we find another way," she said. That evening, the rain stopped. Clouds hung low over the valley, and the whole ranch smelled of wet earth, horse sweat, and wood smoke. Jonas stayed in the barn longer than needed. Toby carried water without being asked. Nora copied the key numbers from the ledger onto a separate sheet and hid the original papers in the flour bin inside a clean oilcloth. She did not like hiding things. But she liked losing truth even less. After supper, a knock came at the front door. Jonas stood first. Toby reached for the fire poker. Nora gave him a look, and he set it down reluctantly. Jonas opened the door. Mrs. Alma Pike stood on the porch with a basket over one arm and a shawl pulled tight against the damp evening air. "I brought bread," she said. Jonas looked at the basket, then at her face. "You came 3 miles after rain to bring bread." Mrs. Pike glanced past him to Nora. "I heard Wade Mercer rode this way." No one spoke. Mrs. Pike stepped inside without invitation, the way some women could when they had decided manners were less important than the matter at hand. She set the basket on the table, lifted the cloth, and took out a loaf. Under it, folded into a square, was a page torn from an old church record. "I did not come for bread," she said. Nora's heart began to pound. Mrs. Pike looked at Jonas. "Before Lydia took sick, she came to me at church. She was upset, though she tried not to show it. She said Silas Mercer had sent his son to pressure her about the south pasture. Wade, not Silas. She said he brought papers and would not leave until she threatened to call Toby from the barn." Toby's face went pale. Mrs. Pike placed the church record on the table. "I wrote a note to myself that day because Lydia asked if I would remember should she ever need me to. I put it in the church ledger. I did not know she would be gone." By week's end, Jonas gripped the back of a chair. Nora gently unfolded the paper. The note was short but clear. Lydia Vale reports renewed pressure from Wade Mercer regarding south pasture deed. Says offer came with warning that refusal may bring hardship. She fears Jonas will be burdened if told too soon. Nora looked up. Mrs. Pike's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "I should have spoken after she died. She said I was afraid of Mercer." "Most of us were." Jonas's face was full of pain, but he did not accuse her. "Thank you for speaking now," he said. Mrs. Pike nodded once. "If this moment touched your heart, remember how many truths stay buried because good people are afraid. Stay with Nora and Jonas because one brave voice may open the door for many more." After Mrs. Pike left, Jonas walked outside alone. Nora waited a minute, then followed. She found him by the creek, standing under the clearing sky. Moonlight broke through the clouds and silvered the water. His shoulders were bowed, not from weakness, but from carrying too many years at once. "She tried to protect me," he said. Nora stood beside him. "Yes. I thought she kept it from me because she did not trust me with it." "No," Nora said softly. "She trusted you. She loved you. That is why she carried more than she should have." He closed his eyes. The creek moved over stones, steady and cold. "I was angry with her for years," he whispered. "Not every day, not always, but sometimes. For leaving me with questions. For hiding pain behind silence." Nora's chest ached. "Grief makes anger out of things it cannot understand." Jonas turned toward her then. His face was bare in the moonlight, stripped of its usual quiet guard. "How do you know that?" She thought of her mother's empty bed, her uncle's hard house, the letter in her drawer. "Because I was angry with my mother for dying," she said. "Then I was ashamed for being angry. Then I was angry at myself for the shame. It can turn in circles for years if no one opens a window." Jonas looked at her for a long while. Then he said, "You opened one." Nora could not answer. His hand lifted slightly, as if he meant to touch her shoulder, then stopped before it reached her. Even now, even in sorrow, he remembered to let her choose. So Nora made the choice for him. She placed her hand over his, only for a moment, only enough to say he was not alone beside the water. His fingers closed carefully around hers. Neither of them spoke. Above the ridge the clouds parted and a few stars showed through. But across the valley, in the upper room of the Mercer Bank, Silas Mercer read the report his son had brought and folded his hands over his desk. The Eastern girl had found Lydia's letter. Mrs. Pike had gone to Cedar Hollow. And Jonas Vale had not come roaring into town like a fool. Silas stared out at the dark street of Mercy Ridge, his face calm as stone. Then he rang the small brass bell beside his lamp. When Wade entered, Silas said only one thing. "Bring me every paper we have on Cedar Hollow." Silas Mercer did not send another rider the next morning. That worried Nora more than if he had. A loud man could be watched. An angry man could be heard coming. But a quiet man with money, patience, and a locked desk in town was something else altogether. Silence from him did not mean peace. It meant he was measuring where to place his hand next. For 3 days, Cedar Hollow held its breath. Jonas rode the fences before dawn and returned after dusk with mud on his boots and a weariness he tried to hide. Toby worked hard enough to make 2 boys of himself, chopping wood, carrying feed, checking latches, and stopping every few minutes to glance toward the ridge, as if expecting the Mercers to appear out of the sky. Nora stayed at the kitchen table with the ledger, the old loan paper, Wade's settlement offer, Lydia's letter, and Mrs. Pike's church note spread around her in careful order. She copied everything twice. One copy she wrapped in oilcloth and hid beneath a loose floorboard in her room. The other she sealed inside a flour sack marked for town. The originals went back into the locked box, but not where Jonas had kept it before. Nora placed it in the bottom of the wood bin beneath split pine, because no banker's son would think to search where actual work left splinters. By the 3rd evening, the waiting had worn everyone thin. Toby dropped a tin cup and cursed under his breath. Jonas looked up from mending a harness. "Careful, it slipped. So pick it up without fighting it." Toby snatched the cup from the floor, his face red. "I ain't afraid of them. No one had said he was." That was how fear often spoke. It defended itself against words nobody used. Nora set down her pencil. "Toby, bring the lantern from the pantry, please." He glared at the cup for one more second, then obeyed. When he returned, she had cleared a place at the table. "Sit. I got chores. Sit anyway." He looked at Jonas, expecting rescue. Jonas did not give it. Best do as she says. She has that look. What look? The one that means arguing will waste more time than surrender. Nora gave Jonas a mild glance. He lowered his eyes back to the harness, but she saw the corner of his mouth shift. Toby sat. Nora turned the ledger toward him. Read this column. His face changed. I don't read figures good. You read feed tallies every day. That's different. No, it only feels different because someone told you it was. The boy shifted in his chair, uncomfortable now, in a way that had nothing to do with Mercer. Nora pointed to the first line. This is hay bought in April. This is the cost. This is the payment. What is left? Toby leaned closer. His lips moved silently. $4, he said. Good. Next line. He worked through it slowly. Jonas's hands paused over the harness, though he did not look up. The stove cracked softly. Rainwater dripped from the eaves outside. By the 5th line, Toby's shoulders had eased. By the 10th, he sat straighter. When he finished the page, Nora nodded. You can read figures just fine. Toby looked at the ledger, as if it had turned into something new before his eyes. I can. You did, he swallowed, then looked quickly toward the window so no one would see his face too clearly. My PA said I was born with more appetite than sense. Jonas's hand tightened on the leather strap. Nora kept her voice steady. Your father was wrong. The boy looked back at her. Such a small sentence, such a large thing to hand a child who had been living under someone else's careless judgment. Toby blinked hard. Maybe. No, Nora said. Not. Maybe Jonas set the harness aside. She's right. Toby stared at the table, fighting himself. Then he nodded once, rough and quick, and stood. I'll fetch more wood. He left before either of them could speak again. The door closed behind him. Jonas looked at Nora across the lamplight. You know how to put a spine back in someone. I know what it feels like when people try to bend one. He studied her, not prying, not pushing. That was one of the things about Jonas that unsettled and comforted her at once. He wanted to know, but he never took. After a moment, he said, I have been meaning to ask. Nora's pencil stilled. The first letter. He said, the one you keep in your drawer. Her eyes lifted. He held up one hand, gently. I did not read it. I saw the edge of it when you opened the drawer for thread. You looked at it like it was either a wound or a weapon. Nora's throat tightened. Outside, Toby struck the woodpile harder than necessary. It was from my uncle, she said. Jonas waited. He wrote that there was no place for me in his house anymore. She folded her hands in her lap, not because I had done anything particular that day. Not because there had been some great fight. He simply decided feeding me cost more than my work was worth. Jonas's face changed in the smallest way, a shadow passing behind his eyes. He put that in writing. Yes. What kind of man does that? One who likes ink because it cannot answer back. The words came sharper than she meant. Nora looked down. I'm sorry. Don't be. She rubbed her thumb over a faint scar near her knuckle. When I answered your notice, I did not think I was looking for happiness. I thought I was looking for a place to stand while I figured out how to keep breathing. That was all. Jonas said nothing. Nora breathed in, slowly. I was afraid you would be hard. I was afraid you would be kind only until vows trapped me. I was afraid of the whole journey, of the train, of the station, of you. And now. She looked at him then. The question was quiet, but it carried more weight than he seemed to know. Now I am afraid of losing this place, she said, which is a different kind of fear. Quote. Jonas's gaze held hers. Is it worse? Nora thought about that. The old fear had been dark and airless. It had made her small. This new fear hurt more because it had room inside it for hope. No, she said, it means there is something here worth being afraid. For Jonas lowered his eyes. For a moment it seemed he might speak. Instead, he picked up Lydia's old letter and turned it carefully in his hands. I was afraid after Lydia died. He said, folks thought I was strong because I kept working. But work can hide a great many things. I was afraid if I stopped moving, the house would swallow me. Afraid if I looked at her photograph too long, I would remember the sound of her coughing. Afraid if I sold the pasture, I would be letting her vanish 1 acre at a time. Nora's eyes burned. He looked toward the stove, where the orange light touched the side of his face. Then, you came into this kitchen and moved the sugar away from the soap, and somehow the whole house began accusing me of not living in it properly. Nora let out a small breath that was almost a laugh. Jonas heard it and looked at her. His expression softened, but only slightly. I was not prepared for you, he said. No one ever is, Nora answered before thinking. This time, he did smile. Just a little, enough to make the room warmer. The moment did not last. Hoofbeats sounded outside, not from the woodpile, not Toby's steps. A horse coming fast through wet ground. Jonas stood. Toby burst through the back door almost at the same time, carrying an armful of wood. He nearly dropped. Rider coming. Jonas took the rifle from above the door but kept it lowered. Nora rose, gathering the papers by instinct. The rider pulled up hard in the yard. A horse blew and stamped. Then came a voice they recognized. Jonas! It's Alma Pike! Jonas opened the door. Mrs. Pike sat side saddle on a gray mare, cloak soaked, bonnet crooked, face pale from hard riding. Nora hurried onto the porch. Mrs. Pike. The woman climbed down with Jonas's help and held out a folded sheet. This came through the mercantile post by mistake. It was meant for the Mercer Bank. I should not have opened it, but the envelope tore in the rain, and I saw Cedar Hollow written inside. Jonas took the page. Nora moved beside him to read. It was a notice from Silas Mercer's attorney in Helena. Payment irregularities having remained unresolved. Holder reserves right to call full balance of South Pasture note within 10 days unless debtor agrees to settlement terms previously delivered. 10 days. Toby whispered the words aloud, as if saying them might make them less real. Jonas's face went still. Mrs. Pike wrung her wet gloves. There is more. Silas has been telling folks in town that you are behind on legal payments. He says he has offered mercy, but pride, and that Eastern girls meddling have turned your head. Nora felt the words strike, but she had no time to bleed from them. Good, she said. All three looked at her. Good, Toby said. Nora took the notice from Jonas and read the language again. He is moving fast because he is afraid of what we have. 10 days is not strength. It is panic wearing a banker's coat. Mrs. Pike stared at her, then gave a short, breathless laugh. Lord, child. Jonas looked at Nora with something fierce and bright behind his quiet. What do you need? The question steadied her. She looked at Mrs. Pike. Can your brother and Helena be trusted? With papers, yes. With gossip, no. He talks too much when pleased with himself. Quote, then we send him only what we need copied into public record. No explanation beyond a request to verify filing dates on the South Pasture deed and note transfer. Jonas nodded, and the lawyer. There's no time to wait for one to wander here. We ride to Helena ourselves. Toby stepped forward. All of us. No, Jonas said. Nora spoke at the same time. Yes. They looked at each other. Jonas's brows drew together. The ranch cannot sit empty. It won't. Mrs. Pike can send word to Reverend Pike or one of the churchmen. Mrs. Pike straightened. My husband and Mr. Granger can come by morning. They know stock well enough. Jonas shook his head. Nora, Helena is 2 days in good weather. Roads are bad. Mercer's men may watch the main trail. Then we do not take the main trail. You barely know these mountains. I know how to follow someone who does. His jaw tightened. This is dangerous. Yes, she said. So is staying here while Mercer writes the ending without us. Silence fell. Toby looked between them, eyes wide. Mrs. Pike stood dripping rain onto the porch boards, saying nothing. though her face made clear she had chosen Nora's side already. Jonas looked toward the dark ridge, then to the notice in Nora's hand, then to the house behind them, the home he had been afraid to want alive again. At last he said, "We leave at first light." Nora nodded. The decision settled over them with the weight of weather. That night, Cedar Hollow did not sleep easily. Mrs. Pike stayed in Nora's room, refusing to ride back through darkness and mud. Toby bedded down by the stove, boots still on, as if Mercer might burst through the door before dawn. Jonas packed supplies in silence, checking straps, oiling leather, counting cartridges he clearly hoped not to need. Nora packed the papers. Lydia's letter, Mrs. Pike's note, the settlement offer, the loan copy, the ledger pages, the surprise notice. Each one folded and wrapped, not just as evidence, but as pieces of a truth that had waited too long. Near midnight, Nora stepped onto the porch for air. The sky had cleared. Stars burned sharp above the black ridges. The creek moved somewhere in the dark, steady over stone. Jonas came out a moment later and stood beside her, leaving a careful space between them. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you. I likely won't. Neither will I." A horse shifted in the barn. The lantern hanging near the door moved gently in the wind, throwing a soft gold sway across the porch boards. After a while, Jonas said, "If this becomes too much, you tell me." Nora looked at him. "And then I carry more of it." She could not speak for a moment. No one had ever offered to carry anything for her without first making sure she understood the debt. "You already are," she said. Jonas turned to her. In the lantern light, his face looked tired, solemn, and painfully kind. "No," he said, "I have been letting you stand beside me. That is not the same as making sure you are not crushed there." The wind lifted a strand of Nora's hair across her cheek. Before she could move it, Jonas raised his hand, then stopped, waiting, always waiting. This time, Nora did not look away. He brushed the strand back with the back of his fingers, barely touching her skin. Such a small kindness, such a dangerous one. Her heart moved like a startled bird. Jonas lowered his hand. "First light," he said softly. "First light," she answered. He went back inside. Nora stayed on the porch, one hand against the pocket where the copied papers rested close to her heart. Across the dark valley, unseen from the ranch, a man on a black horse watched the porch lantern swing. When Nora finally stepped inside, he turned toward Mercy Ridge. By dawn, Wade Mercer would know Cedar Hollow was preparing to ride, and the mountain trail to Helena would no longer be empty. First light came thin and cold, with mist lying low over the creek and the grass shining wet as glass. Nora had not slept more than an hour. She stood in the kitchen before dawn, wrapping the papers in 2 layers of oilcloth while Mrs. Pike kneaded biscuit dough at the counter with the firm, angry motions of a woman who wished the flour were Silas Mercer's face. Toby sat near the stove, pulling on his boots. Jonas checked the straps on his saddlebag for the 3rd time. No one spoke much. Some mornings carried too much weight for ordinary words. Outside, the horses waited near the porch, their breath rising white in the cold air. Jonas had chosen his bay mare, steady and sure-footed. For Nora, he had saddled a sorrel named Juniper, gentle but quick, with kind eyes and a habit of nudging pockets for sugar. Nora tucked the oilcloth packet inside her coat, then tied the copied pages into the lining of her small traveling bag. She had learned long ago not to trust one hiding place. Truth, like seed corn, had to be stored in more than one jar if a person meant to survive winter. Mrs. Pike wiped her hands on her apron and looked at Jonas. "My husband and Mr. Granger will be here before noon. I sent word with our eldest at daybreak. They'll see to the stock." Jonas nodded. "I owe you." "You owe me nothing," she said sharply. Then her voice softened. "I owed Lydia more than I gave her. Let me pay some of it now." Jonas lowered his eyes. Nora saw the pain pass through him, but he held it steady. Toby stood. "I'm coming." "No," Jonas said. The boy's face tightened. "You said we leave at first light." "I said we. I meant Nora and me. That ain't fair." "It is necessary." Toby looked at Nora, betrayed. You said all of us. I did, Nora said, and I was wrong. His mouth opened, but no words came. She stepped closer. Listen to me. Mercer expects Jonas to ride. He may expect me too. He will not expect the most important witness to stay behind with Mrs. Pike. Witness. You saw Wade's horse years ago. You saw it yesterday. If something happens to the papers, your memory matters. Toby's anger faltered, then changed into fear. Something's going to happen. Not if we are wise, Nora said. Jonas rested a hand on Toby's shoulder. I need someone here who can think, not just swing a hammer. That sentence did what scolding could not. Toby straightened, trying not to show how much it mattered. Yes, sir, he said. Mrs. Pike handed Nora a small cloth bundle biscuits, dried apple, a strip of salt pork, and one piece of peach cake because no woman should face a banker on an empty heart. Nora almost smiled. Thank you. At the door, Toby caught her sleeve. Miss Nora, she turned. He looked younger than 16. Come back. The words were plain, but the hurt behind them was not. Another person in his life was leaving before sunrise, and he was trying to be brave enough to let it happen. Nora placed her hand over his. I intend to Jonas helped her mount, though she needed less help now than she had when she first came to Cedar Hollow. His hand lingered only long enough to make sure her foot found the stirrup. Then he swung onto the bay. They did not take the road to Mercy Ridge. Instead, Jonas led them north along the creek, past the cottonwoods, and into a narrow deer trail that climbed behind the ridge. The air smelled of wet pine, cold stone, and horse sweat. Branches brushed Nora's sleeves. Twice, Juniper's hooves slipped in mud, and each time Nora steadied her with the reins at a low word. Jonas looked back once. You all right? Yes. It was not entirely true. Her stomach was tight. Her shoulders ached from lack of sleep. Every snap of twig made her think of Wade Mercer's black horse. But she was still in the saddle, still moving. Sometimes that was truth enough. By mid-morning, they reached a high shelf of land where the trees thinned and the valley opened below them. Mercy Ridge lay small in the distance, a scatter of rooftops and chimney smoke. Beyond it, the road to Helena cut west, like a pale scar through the hills. Jonas stopped the horses in the shelter of 3 pines. We watch from here, he said. Nora followed his gaze. 2 riders waited near the main Helena road, too far to see their faces, but one horse was black. Her hand went cold inside her glove. They knew, she said, they guessed, if we had taken the road. We didn't. The thought of it sat between them. What might have happened? How close danger sometimes came without showing its teeth. Jonas turned the bay toward the higher trail. There's an old miner's, track along Crow Pass, harder ride, but it comes down near the Helena Freight Road past Mercer's Reach. How much harder? He looked at her carefully. Hard enough. Nora adjusted her grip on the reins. Then we should not waste daylight. The almost smile touched his face, quick and gone. No, ma'am. The miner's. Track was no road. It was a stubborn line of broken earth, cutting through timber and stone, climbing toward a pass where the wind had teeth. Nora leaned forward in the saddle, trusting Juniper's steps because doubt would only confuse the horse. Once, a loose rock skittered down the slope, and Nora's heart jumped hard enough to hurt. Jonas rode ahead, turning often to check her. After the 5th time, she called, I am still here. I see that, then stopped looking as if I might vanish. He drew rein until she came beside him. I have seen good things vanish. The words were soft, almost lost under the wind. Nora's irritation faded. Jonas looked away, jaw tight, perhaps regretting the honesty. She wanted to tell him she would not vanish. But that was a promise no person could truly make. Her mother had not meant to leave. Lydia had not meant to die. Even love could not always hold a body to the earth. So Nora said, the truer thing, I am here. Now Jonas turned back to her. The wind moved between them, cold and sharp. A hawk cried somewhere above the ridge. Yes, he said, you are. They rode on. Near afternoon, clouds gathered fast over the pass. The sky darkened from pale gray to iron. Snow began as a few hard specks against Nora's cheeks, then thickened into a restless curtain. Jonas urged the horses down into a cut between rocks, where scrub pine gave some cover. We need to wait this out. Can we afford to? We cannot afford a lame horse or a broken neck. Nora dismounted carefully, legs stiff. Jonas tied both horses beneath a leaning pine, then helped her down the last slick patch of ground. This time she took his hand without thinking. The small shelter in the rocks was little more than a shallow hollow, but it broke the wind. Jonas pulled a canvas from his saddlebag and fixed it as best he could between two branches. Nora crouched beneath it and unwrapped Mrs. Pike's biscuits with fingers clumsy from cold. They ate in silence for a while. Snow ticked against the canvas. Juniper snorted softly. Somewhere below them, hidden by weather, the main road to Helena wound on without them. Nora took out the small piece of peach cake and broke it in half. Jonas looked at it. Mrs. Pike meant that for you. She meant it for courage. We both need some. He accepted his half. For some reason, that made Nora's throat tighten. Not the grand danger. Not Wade's threats. Not the hidden papers. It was this. Two people under a poor canvas in the snow, sharing a piece of cake too small to matter, and too kind not to. Jonas ate slowly. Lydia liked peaches, he said. Nora stilled. She used to save the syrup from canned peaches and pour it over biscuits. Said it made winter. Remember, summer. Nora looked at the cake in her hand. My mother did the same. The coincidence settled gently, like snow. Jonas leaned back against the rock. For a long time I thought remembering Lydia meant staying exactly as grief left me. Same chair, empty. Same photograph, face down. Same pasture untouched. Same silence. Nora listened. Then you came. And you stood her photograph back up without asking anything from it. He looked at her. You did not push her out of the house. You made room for her to stop haunting it. Quote. Nora's eyes burned, but she kept them on the snow beyond the canvas. Maybe grief only haunts where it is not allowed to sit. Jonas gave a small breath. There you go. Saying things strange again. Toby said the same. Toby is right sometimes. They sat quietly. Then Jonas said, I am sorry this danger found you. Nora turned to him. It did not find me. I found it in your ledger. That is not better. It is to me. She folded the cloth from the biscuits. All my life, trouble came into rooms where I had no say. This time, I saw it. I named it. I chose to stand. Jonas watched her with something close to wonder. You make fear sound useful. It can be, she said, if it wakes you instead of ruling you. Snow softened the world around them. The rough pass, the dark pines, the cold stones, all of it blurred into white and gray. Jonas reached into his coat and drew out Lydia's letter. Nora's heart jumped. You brought the original. One of them, he said, one of them. I copied it last night after you went upstairs. He looked almost embarrassed. Seems I learned something from you. Nora laughed softly, surprised by the sound. Jonas looked at her then, really looked, and the expression on his face changed. The guarded quiet fell away for a breath. In its place was a tenderness so clear that Nora felt more exposed than she had on any train platform or town street. She lowered her eyes first. Not because she was afraid of him. Because she was afraid of how much she wanted to trust what she saw. The snow eased near dusk. They mounted again, taking the descent slowly. The trail widened after a mile and dropped into a valley where the land turned gentler. Smoke from a stage relay station rose ahead, thin and blessed. They would not reach Helena before dark. Jonas decided they would stop at the relay, rest the horses, and ride again before dawn. The station keeper, a one-eyed man named Mr. Harlan, knew Jonas by sight and gave them space in the stable loft for a small fee and no questions. Nora was grateful for both. She sat on a clean saddle blanket while Jonas checked the horses below. The loft smelled of hay, dust, and warm animals. Through a crack in the boards, she saw the station yard and the lantern swinging by the office door. A rider came in after nightfall. Nora heard him before she saw him. Slow hoofbeats. A tired horse. A man asking Harlan whether 2 travelers had come through before dark. Her hand closed around the packet in her coat. Below, Jonas went still. Harlan's voice carried up from the yard. Folks come and go. I asked if Vale came Wade Mercer. Nora's blood chilled. Jonas moved silently to the ladder, but Nora was already crawling toward the far side of the loft where old grain sacks hung from pegs. She slipped the packet from her coat and pushed it deep into a torn sack of oats, then covered it with loose straw. Below, Wade stepped into the stable. His spurs sounded softly over the packed dirt. I know you are here, Vale, he called. No need to make this uglier than it is. Jonas stood at the foot of the ladder, looking up at Nora. For one breath, their eyes met. Then Jonas turned and walked out into the lantern light. Jonas stepped out of the stable with his hands empty. He did it slowly, not because he was afraid, but because men like Wade Mercer looked for sudden movements and made stories out of them. The lantern beside the relay station office threw a weak yellow light across the yard. Snow clung to the shoulders of Jonas's coat, and his hat shadowed his eyes. Wade sat tall on his black horse, rain-dark cloak hanging from his shoulders, the silver star on the bridle catching the lantern glow. Behind him were 2 riders, the same kind of men who had waited on the porch at Cedar Hollow. Quiet, watchful, paid enough to follow orders but not enough to ask moral questions. From the stable loft, Nora crouched behind the rail and held her breath. The packet was hidden deep in the torn oat sack. Her hands were empty now, and somehow that made her feel more exposed. Wade looked past Jonas toward the stable door. Where is she? Jonas's voice was calm, who Wade smiled. Do not waste my time. The Bellamy girl. Nora is resting. Bring her out. No, the word was quiet. Not shouted, not dressed with anger. But it settled over the yard like a locked gate. Wade's smile faded at the edges. My father wants to end this peacefully. Then, he should stop sending you. One of the riders gave a short laugh before catching himself. Wade's eyes hardened. You were always stubborn, Vale. Lydia called it honor. My father called it poor judgment. I call it a man, clinging to land he cannot afford. Nora saw Jonas's shoulders tighten at Lydia's name. She pressed her fingers against the loft floor, willing him not to answer from pain. Jonas said, You came all this way to talk. I came to give you one last chance. You gave that chance to Nora on my porch, and she should have taken it. Wade leaned forward in the saddle. Instead, she filled your head with numbers and old grief. You think this ends with a clerk in Helena? You think a few copied papers will save you? Nora went still. He knew about Helena. Not guessed. Knew. Below, Jonas did not turn his head, did not look toward the loft, did not betray one breath of surprise. You seem worried for a man holding all the power, Jonas said. Wade's jaw worked once I am practical. So was Nora when she found the extra charges. The blow landed cleanly. Even from above, Nora saw it. Wade's face did not change much, but the horse under him shifted as his hand tightened on the reins. Careful, Wade said. You are still under note, and your father is still under the law. For the first time, Wade's control cracked enough for anger to show. The law belongs to men who can afford to stand in front of it. Jonas took one step forward. Then why are you standing in a relay yard after dark instead of waiting for it in Helena's silence? The station keeper, Mr. Harlan, stood in the office doorway with a pipe unlit between his teeth. He had not moved since Wade arrived, but Nora could see his one good eye taking in every detail. Jonas saw it too. Maybe Wade did not. That mattered. Wade looked toward the stable again. Miss Bellamy. He called. I know you can hear me. Nora's heart struck hard. Jonas said, You speak to me. No, Wade said. I think I would rather speak to the girl who believes herself clever. He raised his voice. You are a long way from home, Miss Bellamy. You have no family here, no name, no husband yet, whatever Vale has promised. If this goes badly, he loses land. You lose shelter. Think carefully about which one of you has more to risk. The words found old bruises with terrible aim. No family, no name, no shelter. For a moment, Nora was back on the train platform, fingers aching around her suitcase, her uncle's letter burning cold in her pocket. Then another memory came. A room with a latch. A chair pulled out at breakfast. Toby's face when she told him his father had been wrong. Jonas beside the creek, letting her choose whether to touch his hand. Nora moved before fear could talk her out of it. She climbed down the ladder. Jonas turned at once, and the look in his eyes said clearly what his mouth could not in front of Wade. Stay hidden. But Nora was tired of hiding. She stepped into the stable doorway, the lantern light touching her face. I have thought carefully, she said. Wade looked satisfied, as if he had drawn her out by skill rather than cruelty. Then you understand. Yes, she said. I understand that you came in the dark because you are afraid of daylight. Mr. Harlan's pipe shifted in his mouth. Jonas looked at the ground, and Nora suspected he was hiding a smile. Wade's expression sharpened. You mistake nerve for wisdom. No, Nora said. I mistake neither. Nerve is standing here when I am frightened. Wisdom is knowing you would not have followed us unless those papers could hurt your father. The riders behind Wade exchanged a glance. Small, quick, but Harlan saw it. Wade saw Harlan see it. That was the trouble with truth. Once it stepped into a place, even hired men began wondering where to look. Wade dismounted. Jonas moved immediately, placing himself halfway between Wade and Nora. Wade lifted both hands slightly easy. No need for a scene. You made one when you rode in, Jonas said. Wade pulled a folded paper from his coat. My father is increasing the offer. Sign tonight. Give me the letters, the note copies, and whatever little calculations Miss Bellamy has scratched out, and you can keep your house through winter. Refuse, and the full balance gets called. You will lose the pasture first. The rest will follow. Nora's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to look at the paper, not his face. Why would Silas Mercer pay for worthless mistakes, she asked. They are not mistakes. They are misunderstandings. Then let a clerk misunderstand them with us tomorrow. Wade stepped closer. Jonas's hand moved, not to his gun, but to his side, ready. Harlan came down off the office porch. I don't want trouble in my yard. Wade did not look at him. Then, stay out of it. Harlan removed the pipe from his mouth. Hard to stay out when a man brings trouble to my door and calls it business. Wade's eyes flicked toward him, irritated. This does not concern you. Quote, folks always say that right before asking a man to forget what he saw. Nora watched Wade recalculate. It happened behind his eyes, quick as a shutter closing. There were too many witnesses now. Not friendly ones, perhaps, but independent ones. Harlan, a sleepy stable boy peering through the office curtains. The riders themselves, less certain than before. Wade folded the settlement paper and tucked it back into his coat. This mercy will not be offered again. Nora looked at him. It was never mercy, Wade mounted. The black horse tossed its head, silver star flashing. He leaned down from the saddle, voice low enough that only Nora and Jonas could hear. My father will ruin him before he lets you shame us in Helena. Nora answered just as softly. Then, your father should have kept cleaner books. For one dangerous second, Wade's face darkened. Then, he pulled the horse around and rode out, his men following. No one moved until the hoofbeats faded into the snowy dark. Only then did Nora realize she was shaking. Jonas turned to her. Why did you come down? Because he was speaking to me. I could have answered. I know. Then why? She looked up at him because I needed to hear myself answer. Quote, that quieted him. Harlan walked over, boots crunching in thin snow. You two bring weather with you. Jonas turned. Sorry for the trouble. Didn't say I minded it. Harlan studied Nora with his one good eye. That banker's boy asked for papers he claimed were worthless. Seems interesting. It is, Nora said. Harlan nodded. I don't read contracts, but I know fear wearing a good coat when I see it. He pointed toward the loft. Best sleep in turns. If they're smart, they won't come back tonight. If they're foolish, I'd rather be awake. Jonas thanked him. Nora climbed back to the loft with her legs unsteady beneath her. The oat sack was still in place. She pulled the packet free, checked the wrapping, then held it against her chest. Jonas came up a moment later and sat on the opposite side of the loft, leaving the respectful distance he always kept, but his eyes stayed on her hands. "You are cold," he said. "I'm not." "You're shaking." "That is not always cold." He removed his coat and held it out. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. It was heavy, warm from his body, smelling of snow, leather, and cedar smoke. "Thank you," she said. They sat in the hay while the horses shifted below. After a while, Jonas spoke. "Lydia used to tell me I mistook silence for strength." Nora looked at him. "I thought if I said little, I could hold more. Anger, grief, fear, all of it. But tonight, when he called to you, every silent part of me wanted to step in front and keep you from hearing him. You did step in front." "Not enough." Nora pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders. "Jonas, you cannot protect me from every cruel word." "I know. Do you?" His eyes lowered. She softened her voice. "A safe haven is not a place where nothing painful can reach you. It is a place where pain does not get the final say." He looked at her then, and the hayloft seemed to grow smaller around them. "Is Cedar Hollow that for you?" he asked. Nora thought of the latch, the kitchen, the creek, Toby pretending not to cry, Mrs. Pike bringing truth beneath bread, Jonas waiting for every choice. "Yes," she said. It is becoming that Jonas's breath caught in the smallest way. He looked away, but not before she saw what her answer had done to him. If you believe one act of kindness can change a whole life, stay with this story and let your heart follow Nora a little farther. The hardest truth is still waiting in Helena. They slept little. Before dawn, Harlan gave them coffee so strong it seemed meant to punish the tongue awake. He also gave Jonas a warning. Wade took the west road when he left. Harlan said, "If he means to reach Helena first, he'll beat you on the main way." Jonas frowned. "There's no faster route from here. For a careful man," no Harlan scratched his gray beard, "for a reckless one, there's Miller's Cut." Jonas's face darkened. Nora noticed, "What is Miller's Cut?" "A narrow drop through shale." Jonas said, "Bad footing. Worse, after snow." Could Wade take it? Yes. Would he? Jonas looked toward the west, where the mountains still sat black against the morning. If his father told him to Harlan handed Nora a small, wrapped bundle, jerky and corn cakes. "No peach cake, I'm afraid." She smiled faintly. "We will manage." They left as the first gray light touched the world. The road from the relay station curved through pine and then opened into a long descent toward the Helena Freight Road. Snow lay thin on the ground, not deep enough to stop travel, but enough to hide stones. Nora rode Juniper close behind Jonas, every sound sharp in the morning cold. By mid-morning, they found the first sign, fresh hoofprints cutting down from the shale trail. One horse had slipped badly. Jonas dismounted and studied the churned earth. 3 riders. He said, one came down hard. Wade. Maybe a little farther on, they found a torn strip of dark wool caught on a thorn bush. Nora recognized the fabric from Wade's cloak. Jonas looked toward the bend ahead. Then they heard it. A horse screaming. Not the sharp cry of a startled animal, but a sound of pain and terror that tore through the quiet. Nora's blood went cold. Jonas was already moving. They rounded the bend and saw the black horse first, tangled near a broken washout, one foreleg trapped between stones. One of Wade's hired riders stood helpless beside it. The second rider was gone. And Wade Mercer lay on the ground 10 feet away, pale, conscious, and pinned beneath a fallen branch. His hat was gone. Blood marked his temple, but not badly. His eyes were bright with pain and fury. When he saw Jonas, he tried to lift himself and failed. "Don't stand there," Wade gasped. "Help me." Jonas stopped. Nora saw the struggle in him. Here was the man who had threatened his home, wounded Lydia's memory, followed them in the dark, and promised ruin. Here he was, helpless on cold ground, his fine coat torn, his power suddenly useless. For one long breath, justice and mercy stood facing each other on the mountain road. Then Nora dismounted. Jonas looked at her. She looked back. "We are not like them," she said. That was all. Jonas handed her Juniper's reins and went to lift the branch from Wade Mercer. Jonas lifted the fallen branch with Harlan's help, while Nora held the horses back from the broken washout. Wade Mercer bit down on a cry and turned his face toward the cold ground. His fine coat was torn at the shoulder. Mud streaked one side of his face. The silver confidence he had worn in the relay yard was gone now, stripped away by pain and mountain rock. The black horse screamed again. Nora flinched. The trapped animal thrashed once, then shuddered so hard the silver star on its bridle flashed in the pale morning light. "Easy," Jonas said, not to Wade, but to the horse. One of Wade's hired men stood uselessly nearby, hat in hand, eyes wide. The other rider had taken off, likely to fetch help or save himself. Men who sold their courage by the day often knew exactly when the price had run out. Jonas knelt by Wade. "Can you move your legs?" Wade's face was white. "I don't know. Try your toes." Wade cursed softly, but his boots shifted. "Good," Jonas said. "Nothing broken clean through." Then Nora came closer with a strip of cloth from her saddlebag. "His head is bleeding." "It's nothing," Wade snapped. She looked at him. "Then you won't mind holding still while I waste my time." Harlan gave a dry cough that might have been laughter. Wade glared, but stayed still as Nora cleaned the cut at his temple. Her fingers were steady, though her stomach was not. He had threatened her less than 12 hours before. He had spoken her deepest fears out loud and tried to turn them into a cage. And yet here he was, human beneath the mud. That was the difficult thing about mercy. It did not wait until someone deserved it. If it did, it would become something else entirely. Jonas moved to the black horse. He spoke low, one hand extended, letting the animal smell him. The horse trembled, wild-eyed and breathing hard. The foreleg was wedged deep between two stones, scraped but not broken as far as Nora could see. "Need to shift this rock," Jonas said. Harlan looked at it. "That rock weighs more than Wade's pride." "Then it can be moved," Nora said. Jonas glanced at her, and for one brief second the corner of his mouth stirred. They worked together. Jonas used a fallen limb as a lever. Harlan put his shoulder into it. Nora kept the reins firm and murmured to the horse, repeating nonsense in a calm voice because calm mattered more than meaning. The hired rider finally found enough shame to help. The stone shifted. The black horse pulled free and stumbled, but stayed standing. Wade watched from the ground, breathing through clenched teeth. For the first time since Nora had met him, he looked young. Not innocent, not kind, just young. A son raised in the shadow of a powerful father, taught to carry a name like a weapon and mistake fear for respect. Jonas came back and looked down at him. "You can ride behind your man to the next station. Harlan will get word to a doctor," Wade swallowed. "You're still going to Helena." "Yes. My father will already know. Likely, he will have men there." Likely, Wade stared at him, confused by the lack of fear, or perhaps by the lack of cruelty. "Why help me?" he asked. Jonas looked toward Nora. Nora answered, "Because if we left you here, your father would not be the only one who had to live with it." Wade said nothing. His hired man helped him sit up. Pain bent him forward, and for a moment he seemed about to be sick. Nora turned away to give him dignity he had not earned, but still needed. Jonas walked to her side. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She looked at Wade, then at the road ahead. "I think mercy is heavier than anger." "It is. You carry it often." Jonas followed her gaze. "I try. The words were plain, but she understood the cost inside them. They left Wade with Harlan and the shaken rider near the washout. Harlan promised to take him back to the relay station and send for a doctor. Wade did not thank them, not with words. But as Jonas mounted, Wade looked at him once with something broken and uncertain in his face. Nora saw it. Sometimes a crack in pride was the first place light entered. They rode hard toward Helena. The land changed as the morning opened. Pine gave way to wider road to rolling grass to the signs of a larger settlement. Wheel ruts deepened. Fences became more frequent. Telegraph poles marched along the freight road like thin black crosses against the sky. By late afternoon, Helena rose ahead, busy and smoky, its buildings packed tight against the hills. Wagons rattled over muddy streets. Men in wool coats moved between offices, saloons, banks, and boarding houses. The air smelled of coal smoke, horse dung, wet lumber, and money. Nora had not seen so many people since leaving Pennsylvania. Her body remembered crowded places before her mind could calm it. She felt small again, watched again. A girl with a suitcase and nowhere certain to stand. Then Jonas brought his horse alongside Juniper. "You are not alone," he said. She had not spoken her fear. He had simply heard it in the way she held the reins. Nora breathed in, slowly, "I know." And for once, she nearly believed it without effort. They went first to the county clerk's office. Mrs. Pike's brother, Edwin Marsh, was a narrow man with ink on his cuffs and spectacles sliding down his nose. He had the restless manner of someone who enjoyed knowing things, which made Nora trust him only halfway. Still, he recognized Alma's handwriting on the note they carried and led them into a back room away from the front desk. "You understand," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "I can verify filings, certify copies, and locate transfer records. I cannot offer legal counsel. We need paper." Nora said counsel can follow. Quote, Edwin blinked at her directness, then looked at Jonas. Jonas said, "She speaks for this matter." Something in Nora stilled, not because she needed permission, because he had made her standing plain in a room where men would have easily looked past her. Edwin cleared his throat. "Very well." They worked until the office lamps were lit. The South Pasture deed had once been Lydia's inheritance from her father, as her letter said. The first attempted purchase by Silas Mercer had never been filed, but there was record of a survey request paid by Mercer's bank years before Jonas ever borrowed against the land. That proved interest. More important, the note transfer from the widow to Silas Mercer had been filed with a side schedule of fees. Nora spotted the trouble before Edwin did this page, she said, tapping the record. "This version lists no insurance fee." Edwin frowned. "That is the filed transfer schedule." She pulled Wade's notice from her packet. "This one does." Jonas leaned closer. Edwin compared them, his face slowly changing. "That is not a small difference." "No," Nora said. "It is a new charge added after filing." Quote, "Which means," Jonas said, voice low, "Mercer is using a term the public record does not support." Edwin removed his spectacles, "It appears so. Can you certify that?" Nora asked. "I can certify the file transfer schedule as it exists in county record." "And the date?" "Yes. And that no insurance fee is listed." Edwin hesitated, then nodded. "I can provide a clerk's statement describing the absence of such fee from the recorded instrument." Nora sat back. For the first time since Wade appeared at Cedar Hollow, the tight band around her ribs loosened. They had him. Not fully, not finally, but enough to stand on. Jonas looked at her, and the pride in his eyes nearly made her look away. She did not. Edwin prepared the certified copies with great care. Each page was stamped, signed, and sanded dry. Nora watched every movement. When the papers were finished, she placed them inside the oilcloth packet with Lydia's letter, Mrs. Pike's note, the settlement offer, and the false notice. Outside, Helena had turned dark. Gas lamps glowed in windows. Men laughed too loudly near a saloon. Somewhere, a piano played a tune with more cheer than skill. "We need a lawyer before morning," Jonas said. Edwin pursed his lips. "There is Mr. Amos Greer, 2 streets over. He handles land disputes. Honest enough, though not cheap. Honest enough will do, Nora said. Edwin looked at her again, this time with a touch of respect. Alma said, "You had a head on your shoulders." Alma is generous. No, Jonas said. She is accurate. Nora turned toward him. His face was serious. That made it worse somehow. Easier to doubt a compliment when it wore charm. Harder when it came plain. They found Amos Greer in an office above a printer's shop, eating cold beans from a tin while reading a case file by lamplight. He was a broad, gray-bearded man with tired eyes and a voice that sounded like gravel rolled in honey. He heard them out without interruption. Then he read the papers. Then he read them again. At last he leaned back and said, "Silas Mercer has been too clever." Nora's hands tightened in her lap. "Is that good or bad?" "For him," Greer said, "bad. For you, it depends on whether you have the stomach to let the law move slower than your anger." Jonas glanced at Nora. "She said we do," Greer nodded. "The false fee can stop the note call. Lydia Vale's letter and the church note can support a pattern of pressure. The settlement offer is especially useful. A man does not ask someone to waive questions about old dealings unless he fears old dealings being questioned. "Can we save the pasture?" Jonas asked. Greer looked over the papers. "Yes, I believe so." The word "yes" filled the room so fully that Nora had to close her eyes. Greer continued, "But Mercer will not fold easily. Men like that do not fear being wrong. They fear being seen. We file an injunction in the morning to prevent the note from being called until the fee dispute is heard. Then we request examination of the Mercer Bank's records related to the transfer." Nora opened her eyes. "Will a judge grant that, with these papers, likely is not certainty? No, miss. Law rarely deals in certainty, it deals in weight. Right now, your side has gained some." Jonas exhaled slowly. Greer pointed at the packet. "Keep those close tonight. Not in your room if you stay at a hotel. Too easy. Leave a certified copy with me. Carry one. Hide one elsewhere." Nora almost smiled. "Already done." Greer looked at Jonas. Yours." Jonas answered before Nora could stiffen. "She is her own." The lawyer's brows rose, then he gave a small nod. "Good answer." Quote, "They left one certified copy with Greer and took another to the boarding house." Nora hid the most important pages inside the lining of her bag and placed less important copies beneath the mattress. Jonas noticed and said nothing, though his expression made clear he approved. The boarding house room had 2 narrow beds and wallpaper peeling near the window. Jonas insisted Nora take the room while he slept in a chair in the hallway outside, despite her protest that it was unnecessary. "It is not about mistrust," he said. "It is about rest. You cannot sleep if you are listening for footsteps alone." She did not know how to argue with that, because he was right. Before closing the door, she looked at him sitting in the hall, hat on his knee, shoulders broad and tired, eyes still watchful. "Jonas." He looked up. "Thank you for saying. I speak for this matter." "You do. Most men would not have said so." "I am not. Most men." "No," she said softly. "You are not." She closed the door before her face could reveal more than she was ready to give. Sleep came in pieces. Nora woke often, hearing wagons in the street, footsteps in the hall, the low murmur of strangers. Each time she saw Jonas's shadow beneath the door and slept again. Near dawn, shouting rose from the street. Nora sat up. Jonas knocked once. Nora. She was already reaching for her bag. "What is it?" "Mercer." She opened the door. Jonas stood there pale with anger, holding the morning edition of the Helena paper. Across the front, beneath an article about freight delays and mining claims, was a notice placed by Silas Mercer's bank. It named Jonas Vale as delinquent. It described the South Pasture dispute as a reckless attempt to avoid lawful debt. And worse, it called Nora, an unidentified Eastern woman, exerting improper influence over a grieving widower for personal shelter and gain. The words blurred, then sharpened. Jonas's voice was rough. "I'll go to the printer." "No," Nora said. "He cannot print this about you. He already did." "I won't let it stand." Nora stared at the paper. Shame tried to rise. Hot and old, but she held it down with both hands inside herself. She thought of every room where she had been made small by people who spoke first and loudest. Then she folded the newspaper carefully. "We take this to Mr. Greer," she said. Jonas looked at her, Nora. She met his eyes. "He has stopped arguing the papers and started arguing me. That means the papers are winning." His anger did not vanish, but it changed shape. He nodded once. They reached Greer's office just as the lawyer unlocked his door. He read the notice, cursed softly, and then smiled without humor. Mercer made his first mistake. "How?" Jonas asked. Greer tapped the paper. He put his fear in print. By noon, the injunction request was filed. By 3, Judge Ellison had agreed to hear the emergency matter that same afternoon. By 4, Nora stood in a courtroom with Jonas at her side, Amos Greer before them, and Silas Mercer seated across the aisle in a dark suit with a face like carved stone. Wade was not there. That absence spoke loudly. The hearing was brief at first. Greer presented the file transfer schedule, the false fee notice, the settlement offer, and the public statement Mercer had printed. Mercer's attorney argued smoothly that the fee was customary, that the notice was lawful, that Jonas Vale had been misled by an unqualified young woman with no standing. Judge Ellison, a sharp-eyed woman with gray hair pinned severely at the back of her head, looked over her spectacles. "Unqualified? In what respect?" she asked. The attorney paused. "She is not trained in law or finance." "Can she read?" The attorney blinked. "I presume so." "Can she subtract a ripple pass through the room?" Silas Mercer's face did not change. Judge Ellison turned to Nora. "Miss Bellamy, did you identify the difference between the recorded transfer schedule and the fee demanded in Mr. Mercer's notice?" Nora stood. Her knees wanted to tremble. She did not allow them. "Yes, Your Honor." "Explain how so." Nora did, plainly, calmly, with the exact dates, exact fees, exact missing clause, and exact difference between what was filed and what Mercer demanded. She did not defend her character. She defended the truth. When she finished, the room was silent. Judge Ellison looked at Silas Mercer. "Mr. Mercer, this court will not permit foreclosure action or note acceleration based on a fee not present in the recorded instrument. Temporary injunction granted pending full review. Further, I am ordering production of the bank's related transfer records." For the first time, Silas Mercer moved. Only his hand, closing slowly over the head of his cane. But Nora saw it. So did Jonas. Outside the courthouse, winter sunlight cut pale across the steps. Greer shook Jonas's hand. "Then Nora's you bought time," he said. "And maybe more than time." "How much more?" Nora asked. "That depends what Mercer's records show." Jonas looked at her, and she could feel the pull of home in him. Cedar Hollow, Toby, the creek, the kitchen lamp. They had won a day, not the whole fight, but a day was something. Tell me in the comments, would you have had the courage to stand in that courtroom after seeing your name shamed in print? Nora did not feel fearless. She only chose not to let fear speak louder than truth. They started back the next morning with certified papers, a court order, and a warning from Greer to return if Mercer resisted. The ride home was slower. Tiredness had settled into both of them, and Jonas's horse favored one hoof slightly after the rocky descent. They avoided Miller's Cut and stayed on the safer freight road now that the order was filed, and any open trouble would draw attention Mercer could not afford. By dusk on the second day, the cottonwoods of Cedar Hollow came into view. Toby was on the porch before they reached the yard. He ran down the steps, stopped himself from hugging Nora only by great effort, then failed and hugged her anyway. "You came back." Quote, "I said I intended to. That ain't the same as doing it." "No," she said, smiling tiredly, "it is not." Mrs. Pike stood in the doorway behind him, one hand pressed to her chest. Reverend Pike and Mr. Granger were in the yard near the barn. both looking relieved enough to pretend they had not been worried. Jonas dismounted and handed Toby the court order. "The pastor is safe for now," he said. Toby read the first line, then the second, then looked at Nora. "You did it." "We did it," she said. That night, the kitchen glowed warmer than Nora remembered. Mrs. Pike had made stew. Toby had baked biscuits that were hard at the edges but edible in the middle, and he accepted praise with suspicious delight. Jonas placed the certified court order in the locked box, then left the box open on the table. "No more hiding it under wood?" Nora asked. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight it can sit where we can see it." After supper, Mrs. Pike and the churchmen left for town. Toby went to the bunk room, yawning so wide, Nora feared his jaw might stick. The house quieted. Nora stood at the sink washing the last bowl. Jonas came beside her with a towel. "You cooked," he said. "I wash. I did not cook. Mrs. Pike did." Quote, "You rode to Helena and faced a judge. That is not cooking. It counts." She handed him the bowl. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away quickly this time. Jonas dried the bowl and set it down. "Nora," he said. The way he said her name made the room go still. She turned. He stood close, but not too close. His eyes held the same careful tenderness she had seen in the loft, in the snow, beside the creek. "I need to say something before more trouble comes," he said, "because trouble has a way of stealing clean moments if a man lets it." Nora's heart began to beat hard. Jonas took a breath, but before he could speak, a knock came at the front door. 3 soft taps, not Wade's hard warning, not Mrs. Pike's brisk rhythm, something slower. Jonas opened the door. A woman stood on the porch beneath the lantern, wrapped in a dark traveling cloak. She was perhaps 40, with a tired face, gloved hands, and eyes red from a long ride. Behind her waited a wagon with a trunk tied to the back. She looked past Jonas and saw Nora. "Miss Bellamy?" she asked. "Yes," the woman swallowed. "My name is Ellen Rusk. I kept house for Silas Mercer for 12 years. She clutched a packet of papers to her chest. "And I know what happened to Lydia Vale." The kitchen behind Nora seemed to tilt. Jonas went utterly still. Outside, the creek kept running in the dark, as if it had been waiting all these years for someone brave enough to speak. Ellen Rusk stepped into Cedar Hollow with the look of a woman who had been running from the same shadow for too many years. Her cloak was damp from the night air. Dust clung to the hem of her dress. One glove had split across the thumb, and the hand beneath it trembled so badly she pressed the packet of papers tight against her chest, as if it were the only thing holding her upright. Jonas did not move. For a moment, the whole house seemed to stop breathing with him. Nora stood by the kitchen table, one hand resting on the back of a chair. Toby had come in from the bunk room at the sound of the knock, his hair mussed, boots unlaced, eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "You knew Lydia?" Jonas asked. Ellen nodded. "I knew her enough to be ashamed. I did not speak sooner." Jonas stepped aside. "Come in." She crossed the threshold slowly. Nora saw how Ellen looked at the house, the stove, the table, the mantel where Lydia's photograph now stood upright. Her eyes filled at the sight of it. "She hated that blue dress," Ellen said softly, looking at the picture. Said the collar scratched her neck something awful, but it was the only proper one she had for a photograph. Jonas's face changed. "Not much. Enough." A person who had never known Lydia could not have offered such a small, useless truth. Nora pulled out a chair. "Sit down, Mrs. Rusk." "Ellen, please." She sat, but kept the packet in both hands. "I worked for Silas Mercer when Lydia Vale came to his office the first time. Ellen said she came alone. She was carrying herself proud, but I could see she was frightened. Mr. Mercer had sent Wade with papers to your ranch, and she wanted them returned. She said no decent man pressed a woman over land while her husband was away." Jonas's hands curled slowly at his sides. Ellen looked down. Silas laughed after she left. He said pride made poor people easier to break because they would rather starve quietly than ask for help loudly. The kitchen went cold around the words. Nora sat across from Ellen, keeping her voice gentle. What happened after Wade went back again? I heard Silas tell him to make her understand the pasture would be his one way or another. Ellen swallowed. When Lydia fell sick, Silas said fever had saved him an argument. Toby made a small, angry sound. Jonas closed his eyes. Nora felt the grief move through him, but she also saw him hold himself back from letting it become rage. Ellen untied the packet. I did not know then what papers mattered. I only knew Mr. Mercer kept a private book. Not the bank ledger, another one. He called it his future map. In it, he listed every ranch he meant to gain and how much pressure each family could bear before they broke. She unfolded a stack of pages. I copied what I could before I left his service. Nora leaned forward. There were names, dates, loan notes, extra fees, pressure points, widow, sick child, bad harvest, no male heir, grieving husband. Beside Cedar Hollow, in Silas Mercer's own hand, were 3 words. Lydia refuses. Wait. Jonas read it. His face turned pale. Ellen's voice shook. After the judge ordered his bank records opened, I knew he would burn anything private. So I went back. You went into Mercer's office, Nora asked. I still had the old side door key. Ellen gave a tired, humorless smile. A housekeeper learns which locks men forget about. She pulled out one final sheet. This was in his desk. It is a draft agreement. He meant to transfer the South Pasture to a railroad land agent after calling your note. The date is next month. Nora took the paper carefully. There it was. The final truth. Silas Mercer had not been protecting a loan. He had not been correcting a debt. He had been building a trap for years, waiting until grief, debt, and silence made Jonas weak enough to lose the land Lydia had refused to surrender. Jonas sat down slowly. For a long while he did not speak. Then he looked at Ellen. Did Lydia know? She knew he wanted the land. I do not think she knew how long he was willing to wait. Jonas bowed his head. Nora wanted to reach for him, but this grief belonged first to Lydia and to the man who had loved her. So she waited. At last, Jonas said. She stood against him alone. No, Nora said softly. He looked at her. She stood first. Nora said, not alone. Not anymore. The next morning, Amos Greer rode to Cedar Hollow with a deputy and Judge Ellison's signed order in his coat pocket. Ellen gave her statement at the kitchen table. Toby gave his about the black horse and the silver star on the bridle. Mrs. Pike gave hers before noon, her back straight, her voice steady. By sunset, the deputy rode for Mercy Ridge. Silas Mercer did not come quietly. He came out of the bank with his fine coat buttoned, his cane in hand, and his face calm enough to fool anyone who had not learned how fear looked when it wore power. Half the town stood watching from porches and windows as the deputy read the order for seizure of private ledgers and bank records related to Cedar Hollow and 3 other ranches. Wade stood near the hitching rail, one arm in a sling from the mountain fall. He did not speak. When his father looked to him, Wade looked away. That was not justice in full, but it was the first stone falling from a wall. The investigation did what truth often does once a door is opened. It found more doors, more false fees, more pressured offers, more quiet families who had thought they were the only ones. Silas Mercer's bank did not collapse in one dramatic day. Life was rarely that tidy. But his hold over Mercy Ridge broke piece by piece. His accounts were placed under review. His right to call Cedar Hollow's note was suspended. Then the false charges were struck. Then the South Pasture was cleared from his claim entirely. In spring, Jonas paid the true balance with cattle money, neighbor help, and a fair extension arranged through a bank in Helena that now had every reason to look honest. The South Pasture stayed Cedar Hollow land, Lydia's land, Jonas's land, and, in time, Nora's too. The wedding came in late April, when the cottonwoods were just beginning to leaf out, and the creek ran loud with snowmelt. Reverend Pike stood beneath the porch roof because rain threatened all morning, and then, at the last moment, held back as if even the sky had decided this house deserved one gentle hour. Nora wore her blue dress, mended at the cuffs, and pressed with care. Mrs. Pike pinned a small white flower in her hair. Toby stood beside Jonas, trying so hard not to cry that he looked angry at the floorboards. Jonas wore his best coat. He had shaved clean, though he cut himself once at the jaw and seemed embarrassed by it. Nora thought the small red mark made him look more human, and she loved him for that, too. When Reverend Pike asked if she came by her own choice, Nora looked at Jonas. She thought of the train platform, her suitcase, the letter that said there was no place for her. She thought of the room with the latch, the first breakfast at the table, the ledger under lamplight, the mountain snow, Wade pinned beneath the branch, Ellen at the door, and Jonas waiting every time instead of taking I do. She said. By my own choice, Jonas's eyes shone then, and he did not look away. Afterward, Toby hugged them both and pretended he had not. Mrs. Pike cried into a handkerchief and blamed the wind. Ellen Rusk stood near the steps, quieter than the others, but when Nora thanked her, Ellen only shook her head. No. She said, "Thank you for being brave before I was." Nora looked toward the creek. Maybe bravery is like a lantern. One person carries it first, and then others can see where to walk. That evening, after the neighbors left and the house settled into peace, Nora went upstairs to her old room. The latch still worked. The wildflowers were long gone, but the chipped blue cup remained on the desk. She opened the drawer and took out her uncle's letter. "There is no place for you here now." She read it one final time. Then she turned it over and saw the sentence she had written months before. Maybe there is. Nora carried the paper downstairs, folded it small, and placed it in the stove. She did not burn it in anger. She burned it because she no longer needed it to prove what she had survived. Jonas stood beside her, silent and warm. When the flame caught, he took her hand. Outside, the creek ran through Cedar Hollow, bright under the moon, past the cottonwoods, past Lydia's pasture, past the porch where a frightened girl had once arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a choice. She had come west looking for shelter. She had found a home. And in the quiet beside the man who had never once forced her heart, Nora finally understood that a safe haven was not built from walls, land, or locked doors. It was built from truth, from kindness, from the courage to stay. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where love, pain, and justice meet on the frontier.